Hello everyone. Let's move on with the next topic of Indian polity and governance, and let's go to citizenship. In the previous topic we had discussed about the state and the union territories. We also discussed about the difference between Delhi and also Pondicherry. In this session we will try to cover the maximum part of polity, and let's start with citizenship now. Now, what is a citizenship? Now, first of all, how do we understand citizenship? Citizenship is basically for any person Alright, so citizenship is for any person who has a political right. Now, when we say a political right, you should always know that it is right to vote. Well, right to vote is a legal right and also a constitutional right in case of India. Okay, so political right always defines any person, especially on the citizenship. So if at all, if you say any person is a citizen of some country, then you should understand that he has a political right. So political right means that it is right to vote. Okay, and there are two set of people, especially when we speak about citizen. The first part of it is citizen, the second part of it is an alien. Again, alien is a foreigner. Now you should not think otherwise. Alien is normally a foreigner. It can be of two types. One is the friendly, the other one is the enemy alien. When we say a friendly alien, it is from any person who is a friendly nation, a foreigner who is from a friendly nation of India. So he's called as a friendly alien, while any foreigner who is regarded as from the enemy nation of India, he is regarded as an enemy alien. All right. So the difference is very clearly seen on all of this in Article 22 of the Indian Constitution, where there are certain fundamental rights which is applicable only for the citizen. All right, but the fundamental rights, is given to both of them. It's given to both alien as well as the citizen. But there are certain fundamental rights which are exclusively applicable only for the citizen of this country. Okay, and which are them? They are Article 15, 16, 19, 29, and 30. And when the preamble of the Indian Constitution came in, that's on 26th November 1949. On this day when the preamble was enacted and given to this constitution, especially the constitution was given to the people of this country, this was a time where there are certain provisions of the Indian Constitution which came into vogue, which were implemented from that time itself. And one of that is the citizenship. See, there are other things also behind it. You have Article 60 also. During that time, what's Article 60? Article 60 is about the oath and affirmation of the president and important constitutional authority, especially this is on the president. So Article 60 is related to the oath and affirmation related to the president. And apart from that, you also had Article 324. Now, all of these citizenship, which is from 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, all of these articles were implemented immediately after the Constitution was enacted to this country. And that's on 26 November 1949. You had 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So all of this came into implementation. It came into execution during that time. Apart from that, Article 60 came into execution. Article 324, what is Article 324? It's related to the Election Commission of India, the Superintendents of Election Commission of India. These were some of the most important things which came into picture during those time. And, you also saw Article 379, which was deleted later. Why it was deleted later? It was deleted later is because it's related to the Constituent Assembly and also about the temporary parliament. That's on the implementation of the constitution by the temporary parliament, and we are speaking about the Constituent Assembly. So one of the most important point which is important for the examination is that the citizenship is one such provision which was implemented immediately when the Constitution was enacted on 26 November 1949. The rest of the constitutional provision came into picture after 26th Jan 1950. That's when we declare ourselves as Republic. So those things which came into implementation from the Constitution after 26th Jan 1949 are the citizenship, which we are discussing right now. And then Article 60, that's on oath and affirmation of by the President. And Article 324, that's the Superintendents of the Election Commission of India. That's to conduct elections across this country. Article 379, that's related to the temporary provisions of the temporary parliament. That's the provisions of the temporary parliament. Why we call it as temporary provisions is because after the Constitution was enacted, the Constitution gave provisions for its implementation. So, well, it speaks about the implementation of this. Well, it was also deleted later. The reason why it was deleted is because we had the interim parliament was completely taken over by the Parliament of India. Well, these are certain things what you have to remember about the basics of the citizenship. Now, who is a citizen? A citizen is a person who has a political right. So the moment we speak about the political right, it means that a person who has a right to vote, he is regarded as a citizen. Now, there is always a confusing part, and that is, do they enjoy civil rights? Who enjoys civil rights? Civil rights are enjoyed by citizens and also non-citizens. Now, whenever we speak about this, you should also remember about the stateless person. The term called as a stateless person. Now, who is a stateless person? A stateless person is one who does not belong to any country. Basically, is not a citizen of any country. Alien is a foreigner who is a citizen of some other country. However, whenever we speak about a stateless person is a person who does not have a citizenship of any other country. For example, all of those illegal immigrants, let's take an example of ethnic Tamils of Sri Lanka. They are the classic example of stateless person. You also had Rohingyas. Rohingyas are also a classic example of stateless person. It's because the citizenship is never recognized by Myanmar, and then their citizenship was not recognized by Bangladesh, and their citizenship is also not recognized by India. Of course, Indian government will not recognize the citizenship of these people. Well, talking about the ethnic Tamils of Sri Lanka, initially, Indian government never applied citizenship rules to them. So therefore, they were not recognized as citizens in Sri Lanka, and that's the reason why they fought against them. And that's where there was a organization called as LTT, which came into Oak, and then Velupillai Prabhakaran. He was a brainchild behind it. They fought the rights, they fought for the political rights. However, it was branded as a terrorist organization is because of their bloodshed revolution. And after it was sanitized by the Sri Lankan army and the Sri Lankan government, after this organization was completely sanitized, and that's when the ethnic Tamils who were living in Kilinochchi and Jaffna, especially in the northern parts of Sri Lanka, they started moving towards Tamil Nadu, and they started living there as stateless person. It's quite unfortunate that the central government, did not grant any citizenship to these people, but chooses to give citizenship to Citizenship Amendment Act. Of course, you should always understand it's the right of the government of India to give citizenship to any person according to the Citizenship Act of 1955. So why we are discussing about this? Because of the stateless person. Stateless person is a person who does not belong to any country. However, a person who has to get a citizenship or whose citizenship is already recognized, it's based on this act, that is Citizenship Act of 1955. Well, it's the same act which was amended. It was amended for the 5th time. That was in 2019. Right, and the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019 was also implemented recently, right, and related to the citizenship rules. We'll also look at the citizenship rules is because it is a current topic, and we'll try to understand how the citizenship rules has been notified and what's the implementation, who does the implementation, and which is the nodal ministry to do so, and which are the committees which are responsible for implementation of citizenship. We'll see it in the near future. Okay, all right. So this is about the basics of citizenship. Let's move ahead. Well, as I mentioned, the government of India has every right to grant citizenship to any person based on the Citizenship Act of 1955. Now, this is what we need to understand here. The Constitution of India does not provide any detailed provision of the citizenship in this country. So the type of citizenship and who is a citizen, all of that is decided by the Citizenship Act of 1955. So who has the authority to decide the citizenship? It's the Parliament, because Parliament has enacted this. And who is behind the Parliament? Of course, the government of India. So can the government give citizenship to any person? Yes, it can. And you all see that there's a Citizenship Amendment Act which is being done, and that has to be enacted through a law in the parliament. So therefore there is an amendment related to it. Okay. So well, in the constitutional provisions, whenever we speak about the citizenship, it's Article 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11. Okay. And it relates to those people who are domiciled in India, and those people who migrated from India to Pakistan and Pakistan to India, and some people who went from India to Pakistan and then they did not like it, but then they came back to India and then registered themselves with their citizenship. And also to all of those persons of Indian origin, that's PIO. Now it also relates to all of those people who are PIO, that's person of Indian origin, who resides outside India. Right? So all of them are covered under the constitutional provision of from 5 to 11. Well, you should always understand that before 26 Jan 1950, now this is a date which is always taken into consideration in all of determining the types of citizenship, is because from 26 Jan 1950 till some other date has been defined in order to identify the citizenship of any person. However, you should always understand there is another important cutoff date, and that's before July 19th, 1949. Before this. Before July 19, 1949, this is another cutoff date which speaks about those people who went to Pakistan, who wanted to come back to India, and they wanted to register their citizenship, provided their parents or grandparents are born with India. So these are all related to domicile, right? And related to those people who are born in India, undivided India, so well, they'll get the citizenship as usual. So the constitutional provisions from 5 to 11 relates to these things. You need not have to go to them in detail. All right, you have to just remember this. It's about all of those people who are born before 26 Jan 1950 and this cutoff date. Please do remember this cutoff date is basically because before this cutoff date, if anybody has registered the citizenship in India, it means that they've got the citizenship in this country. So those people who have migrated from Pakistan to India and registered their name as Indian citizens, it should be before this. Now after this, it is not considered by the Indian government. And one more most important thing what we need to understand in the case of the citizenship is related to something called as the NRC. And NRC refers to National Register of Citizenship, and we will discuss about NRC a bit later, right? See, before this, what the British did was, British enacted two other acts, and one of the act is the Foreigners Act of 1946 and the Passport Entry Act. Sorry, it's 1946, beg your pardon. It's the Passport Act. Passport Entry Act. So, well, the present Citizenship Amendment Act, it goes against both of them. That's on the Foreigners Act of 1946 and also the Passport Entry Act, because those people without a valid passport, they cannot enter India. So they become an illegal immigrant. And any foreigner, who enters India, based on the Foreigners Act of 1946, he should always have a passport. Otherwise, it becomes a punishable offense, right? And the government of India has every right to deport them. So all of that is covered in these two. Well, the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019 tries to give an exemption for all of those who are getting a citizenship, and the exemption is related to Foreigners Act of 1946 and the Passport Entry Act of 1920. So they get an exemption leeway from both of these acts. So this is another important thing what we need to remember. So let's move ahead. Okay, so there are different types of citizenship. Which are these different types of citizenship? There are exactly 5 types of citizenship. So you can acquire an Indian citizenship by 5 types. Five different types. The very first one is called as citizenship by birth. Now, what do you mean by citizenship by birth? Any person who is born on or after 26 Jan 1950, on or after till that of before 1st July 1987. So he has to be before this. Now if he is born in India, he becomes an Indian citizen irrespective of the nationality of his or her parent. So this is interesting. So any person who is born in India on or after 26 Jan 1950, before 1st July 1987, he becomes an Indian citizen irrespective of the nationality of his or her parent. However, any person who is born after the 1st July 1987, then in that case, if he has to become an Indian citizen, so provided their place of birth is in India. So if he is born in India, in that case, either of his parent shall be an Indian citizen. So this is another important thing what we need to understand. So the first part of it is those who are born between this date, they need not have to be an Indian citizen, but then their place of birth is in India, they get an Indian citizenship. However, in the second case of it, those who is born after 1st July 1987, they become an Indian citizen provided their place of birth is in India, provided one more condition is either of the parents shall be an Indian citizen. Now this is done to do away with all of these illegal immigrants who are entering into India. So that's the reason why this is done. The next is the descent, right? Now this is always for those people who are born outside India. So again, there is a date, a stipulated date in this. Any person who is born after 26 Jan 1950 till that of before 10th December 1992. Any person who is born before 10 December 1992, he becomes an Indian citizen provided at the time of his birth, his or her father shall be an Indian citizen compulsorily. So if his or her father is not an Indian citizen, then he or she shall not get the Indian citizenship. Of course, it's basically because these are born outside the country. So, well, any person who is born after 10th December 1992, he or she becomes an Indian citizen, provided that either of the parent shall be an Indian citizen. So, this is where the descent comes in. So, there was one more clause which was added in 2004 after an amendment by 2003. It said compulsorily there shall be one parent who should be an Indian citizen and the other parent shall not be an illegal immigrant. Okay, so this clause is applicable both for birth as well as descent. I repeat this point. Any person who is born after this 1st July 1987 till that of the 3rd December 1992, 2004, and again any person who is born after 26 Jan 1950 till that of 10 December 1992. And from 10 December 1992 till that of 2nd December 2004, parent, one of the parents shall be an Indian citizen and the other parent shall not be an illegal immigrant. So this is what it is in case of the descent. So I repeat this point. So this date that any person who is born after 3rd December 2004, in that case, one of the parent, any person, if he has to become an Indian citizen, one of the parents shall be an Indian citizen and the other parent shall not be an illegal immigrant. So this is a clause which was added later. Now this was one amendment which was made by the Indian government to the Citizenship Amendment Act. So this is what we need to remember. All right. So please do understand, we are not making any amendment in the Constitution of India. It's an amendment to the Citizenship Act of 1955. So well, the present Citizenship Amendment Act is an amendment to the original act of 1955. That is what it is. As we have already discussed, the authority to provide citizenship to any person is always vested with the government of India, and of course they use it through the Parliament of India. So everything is based on a legislation made in the Parliament. Okay, so this is about the descent. So this is for a person who is born outside India, while this is for a person who is born inside India, who is born in India. That's what it is. Well, talking about registration, this is for all of those people who are called person of Indian origin. Now, I did not define what is person of Indian origin. Let's try to define them. A person of Indian origin is that person who is not an Indian citizen, by the way, whose roots were with India. Meaning, his parents or his grandparents were Indian citizens. They gave up the Indian citizenship. They went to some other country and then settled there. And they got the citizenship of that country. Well, since they had to come back to India is basically because they had to visit their relatives or their ancestral property and so on. What they did was they procured something called as a PIO. These people are called as persons of Indian origin. They also procured a card to come back to India, and that was called as the person of Indian origin card. And what is that card basically? If this person gets the PIO card, they can stay in India for a maximum of 6 months without any visa. Okay? And if they have to continue to stay beyond 6 months, then they need the permission of the Indian government, especially the External Affairs Ministry. So this is what it is. Well, that's where the person of Indian origin comes into. So if any PIO wants to apply for an Indian citizen, that is Indian citizenship, then he has to stay in India for 7 years and then apply for the citizenship. And the second clause of those people who can apply for the citizenship through registration is those people who have married an Indian citizen, a foreigner, especially a foreigner marrying an Indian citizen. If a foreigner marries an Indian citizen and stays in India for 7 years, so there cannot be any exemption here. They have to stay in India for 7 years, and that's when they get the citizenship. Or any minor children, who have attained major and then who have not been registered as an Indian citizen, they can also register themselves as an Indian citizen using the registration. So these are the 3 types of or 3 ways of getting the citizenship in case of India. Well, next one is naturalization. So what do you mean by naturalization? Now this is again for a foreigner who wants to become an Indian citizen without marrying any Indian citizen. So any person who is a foreigner who wants to become an Indian citizen, he has to stay in India for 12 years and then apply for the citizenship, and he gets the citizenship through naturalization. And one more thing what we need to understand in this is, for those people who are applying for naturalization, getting citizenship of India through naturalization, before the application, they have to stay in India for a minimum of 1 year, 12 months. Just preceding to the application, they have to stay in this country for a minimum of 12 months. And put together, it shall be 12 years of stay in India. Now, one more thing here. If the government of India feels that it needs to give an exemption to any foreigner and then give a citizenship, it is up to the government to provide it. It can give an exemption owing to their contribution to the society of India or owing to their contribution to any Indian development. So owing to their contribution, the government of India can create any sort of exemption. However, the same thing has to be answered before the parliament or brought to the notice of the parliament. Well, these are the 4 types of getting citizenship in India, 4 ways of getting citizenship in India. There's also one more way, and that's related to acquisition. Now, acquisition of territory. Supposing if India acquires any foreign territory, in that case, the people who are living in that territory automatically gets a Indian citizenship. So we did that with respect to Goa, right? Because Goa was under the Portuguese, and once the Indian army interfered there, we took back Goa from the hands of Portugal and converted those residents from the Portuguese passport into Indian passport. So these are the 5 types of attaining the citizenship in this country. Please do look into the dates here. Directly take the dates from the Ministry of Home. Okay, because it can change every now and then, but then it remains as it is. It's the same thing what has been given in Lakshmikant or PM Bakshi or any other book, including D.D. Basu. So if you still have a doubt, you can have a look into Ministry of Home. It's always better to take all of this from the authentic source, and the authentic source is the Ministry of Home, and it's there in the website. It's published in the website. Okay, let's move ahead. So we discussed about the acquisition of territory. Next, now what are the ways of the government of India, taking up the citizenship or loss of citizenship? So we can say that as loss of citizenship is because a person has lost his citizenship, or different ways. There are 3 ways in which this can happen. The first one is renunciation. Renunciation is voluntary method. Supposing if any citizen is willingly getting the citizenship of some other foreign country and then he wants to give up an Indian citizenship, then he can renunciate his citizenship. So this is renunciation. The second one is termination. Termination and deprivation can happen if at all if Indian government finds that any Indian citizen has got into some illegal means, or if his whereabouts are not known for more than 7 years, he is not employed in any private or a public institution abroad, nor is not studying in any educational universities or institutes. In those cases, even the family members are not knowing about the whereabouts of a person. In those cases, the government of India can, it's justifiable that the government can cancel the citizenship. So that's where the termination and deprivation also can happen. Recently in the Citizenship Amendment Act, there is also one more important clause B there, and that's related to OCI card holders. Who are OCI card holders? OCI stands for Overseas Citizenship of India. Mind you, overseas citizens of India are not Indian citizens. Now, who are they? I told you about PIO. They are none other than the PIO. Okay, that's person of Indian origin. Now, these overseas citizens of India have been given a card which is an advantage to them. Now, why it is an advantage is because it's an attempt to treat them on par with that of the Indian citizens. Now, except the right to vote. They do not have right to vote, but then they enjoy all similar conditions or all similar provisions what an Indian citizen enjoys in India. Can they own any property? Of course, they can own their property, but then there are some reasonable restriction on owning agricultural land. They cannot take up defense employment. There are certain restrictions on the government job also because it mandates that you shall be an Indian citizen. However, they can also have an employment in India. They can stay in India with whatever wish they want. They can stay in India how many years they want to be. And they can also enroll their children in any Indian universities or institutes under general merit category. So all of these are the advantages which an OCI gets. Now, why did the government of India brought this advantage to OCI? There are twin advantages of this. The first advantage is the Indian diaspora, as you all know. Indian diaspora is one of the largest diaspora in the world. And that's the reason why we always get one of the highest of foreign remittances. I'm pretty sure that all of you know what are foreign remittances by now. And foreign remittances are one of the largest source of revenue for the Indian government. Mind you, there's a connectivity of foreign remittances to that of the Gulf oil crisis. Now, this is not the time to discuss all of that, but then I'm just recalling all of this. Well, the second important advantage is these people can be brought back to India and pull in their investments into India. And this can always accentuate developmental activities in India. And that's the reason why Pravasi Bharatiya Divas has also been organized. And their investments can bring in a pool of financial resources wherever we have a lacuna of financial resources. Now, these are the twin advantage of why an OCI was given. And OCI and all of those PIO card holders, they abandoned this PIO card and then they started taking OCI card. And OCI is where they can stay in India without any restriction. Earlier, PIO card holders, they could stay only for 6 months maximum, right? So these are the advantages what the OCI card holder had. So coming back to the point here, in the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019, CAA 2019, Clause B is related to OCI. And what is that? Now, the government of India has every right to confiscate the property of any person, right? And, if any person has procured OCI card through fraudulent means, then it can take an action against them. So this is a second part of the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019. Now, we always concentrate on the first part of the 2019 Citizenship Amendment Act. We don't concentrate on the second part of it. Please do remember the second part of it is already implemented, and only thing is the first part is where the Home Ministry and the Home Minister bought almost 4 years of time in order to implement it, and recently it was implemented. That's where the citizenship amendment rules were made by the Ministry of Home Affairs. All right, so this is about the citizenship and also the laws of citizenship. So moving ahead, so talking about some of the cases of citizenship, so let's try to decipher the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019. So what exactly do we mean by this? Because this is constantly in news, let's try to decipher it. The Citizenship Act of 2019, it provides citizenship to whom? It provides citizenship to Hindu, then Parsi, Sikh, a Buddhist, a Jain, and also a Christian. And this is for all of these 6 religions, and provided these people are migrating from where? Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. And what did the government say? The government said that people belonging to these religions are a minority in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. That's six religions. If they have entered India as an illegal immigrant, and why they have entered India as an illegal immigrant? They have entered India as illegal immigrant. And why they have entered India as an illegal immigrant is because they were religiously persecuted. Because of religious persecution. So because of religious persecution, they entered India. Therefore, they will get an Indian citizenship. They get an Indian citizenship. So this is what we need to understand. So people belonging to these 6 religions, being a minority of these 3 countries, and they were religiously persecuted. They were subjected to religious persecution. So they have entered India as an illegal immigrant. The cutoff date is before 31st December 2014. This is the cutoff date in which they have entered India. They should have entered India. And if they have entered within this cutoff date, they'll get the citizenship. Now, what does the rule states, in order to get the citizenship? And this is where it's important for 2024 prelims. And let me erase this and then bring in. I think if you people can take a screenshot of it, it'll be easy for you. So because I have to erase this. So let me erase this. Alright, so what are the rules here? So let's try to identify the rules. What are the CAA rules? So first is, so let's try to understand which is a nodal ministry here. Nodal ministry to implement this, it's the Home Ministry, Ministry of Home. Okay, so this is a very, very important point. And the Ministry of Home has given this to the Director of Census Operations. And along with that of Department of Post. Well, this director will have something called as Empowered Committee. Now, what committee it is? This Empowered Committee will comprise of officers, and they will also come from the Department of Post, now superintendents and the chief managers and everybody, and those people who are the Inspector General of Post, all of them will be also part of the Empowered Committee. Now, this Empowered Committee will have District Level Committee. DLC stands for the District Level Committee. Now, where if a person needs to get a citizenship under the Citizenship Amendment Act, where shall he approach? He'll approach the Department of Post. I beg your pardon for this typo. It's Department of Post. So they have to approach the Postal Department. The Postal Department shall forward the application to. So what it does? It forwards application. and these applications are forwarded to district level committee. Now the district level committee shall forward the application to the empowered committee, and this empowered committee, which comprises of officers from which is constituted from the Director of Census Operation and the Department of Post, shall take a call whether to process this application and finalize the citizenship to that person. Now, here, what are the two things which the Government of India wants to check? First of all, they validate documents. There are certain documents which they need to validate in the application. And what is that document? The first document which they need to validate is the country of origin. Now, which include various documents. It include their educational certificates or the birth certificate and so on and so forth from these three countries. That's Pakistan, Bangladesh and Afghanistan. The second thing which they need to verify is the date of entry to India. So, any person who needs to get the citizenship of India, he needs to provide the country of origin documents and the documents as a proof of date of entry. And that is in a district level Department of Post, the Postal Department. The Postal Department shall forward that to the district level committee. The district level committee shall scrutinize this, and that goes to the empowered committee. And the empowered committee, as constituted by the Director Census Operation, right, they will take a call in finalizing the citizenship to any person. So this is how the citizenship rules is being made and is being notified by the present government related to providing citizenship to those people who have migrated to India, right? There are a lot of ifs and buts to the citizenship. Well, again, I say that this is not the time to discuss all of them. Right, of course, there are a lot of challenges with respect to it. If you ask me personally, this is my personal opinion. I feel that it affects the security of this country. Now, what the government has done, because this is one of my objection, the government has said that once the application goes to the Director Census Operation, and that's the empowered committee, the government has very clearly said that the background verification will be done by the IB officials, Intelligence Bureau. Right, so that there is no concern of the security. But still, when you are giving citizenship to those people who are not Indian citizens, by the way, right, definitely it's on the national security. What if somebody has forged these kind of documents? Of course, the government is trying its level best to do it, but then this is only my apprehension. There is nothing as such which I am giving this point to anybody. Maybe these points can be used in the means. Right, of course, this can be the challenge, right? Is because if let's say that Pakistan's ISI, it tries to somehow bring in people, with a forged documents, right, and then proves with all of these, they get a first note from the Department of Post and the district level committee, and then even in the case of empowered committee, they somehow get through, and even in the background verification they get through. What if he was an ISI agent, right? It might be minimal, but then there is always this ifs and buts with respect to it. Anyway, it's only a concern, it can be used as a challenge, it can always be a challenge because it's about the national security at the end of the day. Now, anything is not on the question of religion, all right? It's only on the national security is what I personally think. Anyway, so let's move ahead with the next important topic. I hope that all of you have gone and understood what exactly is the Citizenship Amendment Act, and I hope you guys got a bird's eye view of what exactly is the citizenship rules which has been implemented by the Ministry of Home. And maybe it becomes important for the prelims is because it was recently notified. Okay, so let's move ahead with the next topic. Well, the next topic is the Union Executive. Under the Union Executive, we'll discuss about the President. You all know that the President is always regarded as the constitutional head in India. And he is also regarded as a chief executive in India. Well, one of the most important thing is his election, right? How do we elect the president? First of all, the president gets elected through an indirect election. Now, why it is an indirect election? Because we do not participate in it. It's an elected representative from us who participate in the election of the president. The next one is, it is based on a proportional representation system. Now, why it is a proportional representation system? Please do understand it is always dependent on the population. So therefore, it's based on the proportional representation system. And the voting is through a single transferable vote. So what is a single transferable vote? When we are discussing about the procedure of the president, we'll try to understand about the single transferable vote. And the third one is a secret ballot. Now, what is a secret ballot and what's the advantage of having a secret ballot? Secret ballot is one where when you are voting, you are not announcing for whom you are voting for. The reason why this is an advantage is basically because this eliminates horse trading. It eliminates corruption. Secrecy in ballot will always tell, that there is some confidentiality which is maintained by any elector when he is voting for somebody. Otherwise, this might lead to horse trading. That's the reason why the president election is based on a secret ballot. So let's move ahead. Now, how do we calculate the vote value? So this is how the proportional representation system looks like. So one vote of an MLA is based on the total population of the state divided by the total elected MLAs into 1 by 1000. Now, why is this 1 by 1000? Now, 1 by 1000 is basically because for every population calculation is calculated per 1000 people. So that's the reason why this formula. So this vote of an MLA, is different from one state to the other. So all the 28 states will not have the same value is because each state will have different population. And then the total number of elected MLAs varies from one state to the other. So therefore, the total population of the state varies from one state to the other, right? For example, in the case of Karnataka, this might be somewhere around 8 crores. It's 6.5 crores. But then the census, what we take here is 2001 census until and unless the Election Commission of India decides on it, right? And after that, the total elected MLAs and then into 1 by 1000, you will get a value. Now, this value is the same for all MLAs with respect to that state. For example, in case of Karnataka, all MLAs, that's 224 MLAs, will have the same value, right? And why it is the same value? Because the population of the state is the same in that Karnataka. The total elected MLAs, right, is 224 into 1 by 1000. So one vote which is casted by one of the MLA from Karnataka is the same as that of any other MLA of 224. Next, they calculate the vote value of an MP. So why are we doing this? Because we are trying to calculate the vote value of each and every person who is acting like an elector. So total value of all votes of all MLAs, that's 28 states plus 2 union territories until and unless the union territory of Jammu and Kashmir is notified, divided by total elected MPs, right? Now, how many total elected MPs? You have 233 plus 543, which is equal to 776. So this is constant. So total elected MPs right now is 776. So approximately the value will be somewhere between 800 to 850. So you should understand both the Lok Sabha as well as Rajya Sabha's one vote is equal to so much of value. That's 800 to 850. So this is where we are trying to take into the population into consideration. Okay. Now what they do after that is they try to calculate the quota. So how is the quota calculated? Depends on the total electors. Who are the total electors here? The total electors are those people who are participating in the election of the president. That's voting for the election of the president. And the number of president is only 1 and then plus 1. So if I have to take an example here, so let me take an example here. So if I have to take a quota, and I'll assume for the calculation purpose, 1 MLA on 1 MP is equal to 1 vote. Okay, I will not take the value of vote into consideration. I'll take only the number 1 here. I'll not take any vote value into consideration. So this is what you need to understand. So 1 vote of an MLA and 1 vote of an MP is equal to 1 vote. Okay, so I'm not taking this the values there. That's 800 or 230 or 240 into consideration. So total number of electors. So if I take the total number of electors as 100, so let me assume that there are thousands of MLAs and MPs put together. put together, the value will be around 3,000 or 4,000. So I'm not taking that value into consideration for calculation purpose, just to explain all of you guys that how the election happens and how the Election Commission of India calculates their vote. So divided by how many president? It's only one president, plus 1, and then plus 1 according to the formula. So this is 100 divided by 2 plus 1, which is equal to 51. So now, if any person has to win the election, okay, then it should be based on the first preferential vote. And this first preferential vote, in this first preferential vote, he shall get 51 first preferential vote, assuming that there are 4 people who are standing for the election of the president. Now, how did we come to this formula? Now, as I told you, this is the quota. This is a quota formula. Which one is it? This is the one. Total electors divided by number of president plus 1, and then plus 1 there. So therefore, I take 100, I assume. Please do understand, for calculation purpose. And again, please do understand, for calculation purpose, I am not taking the value of vote. 1 MLA is equal to some 230 value. I am not taking that into consideration. I am taking 1 MP and 1 MLA is equal to 1 vote. Okay. So it is 51 first preferential vote. So assume that I am an MP. Okay. So I get a ballot paper here. Just a second here. I get a ballot paper here. So how does my ballot paper look like? So let's try to understand it. So it will have serial number, okay, and after that it will have name of the candidate, and after that it will have the preference, okay. So I assume that there are 4 people who are standing for the election of the president. Okay. So I say 1, 2, 3, 4. I say them as A, B, C, D. If MP gets, I think, pink ballot paper, and MLA gets around green ballot paper, I guess. And just to identify who is an MP and who is an MLA. That's the reason why they get, a different colored ballot paper. So assume that if I'm an MP, this is how our ballot paper looks like. And I'm supposed to give a preference for all of them. So let's say that I give first preference to D, second to C, third to B, and fourth to A. Okay. So what happens is, after the election is conducted, let's assume that D has got 40, candidate D, and let's assume that C has got 30 here. Assume B has got 20 and A has got 10. Okay. So in our election, there are 4 candidates who have stood for the election of the president, and the election happened, and D has got the highest first preferential vote. So this is our first preferential votes. What's the first preference? See, in my case, I have given first preference as D. So if I am a different MP, I can also give, first preference to C. There might be another person who is voting for, he can give first preference to A also. So I am assuming that D has got like 40 first preference votes, C 30, and then B 20, and A has got 10. In this case, the person who has got the least first preference, he gets eliminated. So what happens is, they open his ballot paper. So after they open this ballot paper, they'll take the second preference of that ballot paper. Now in that case, the second preference would be either B or C or D, isn't it? Right? It can be either of these 3. So therefore, that is converted into first preference, and that gets to these people, right? It goes into these people and they count this vote. So after they count this vote, let's say it's 43, and then 33, and then 24. Even then, he has not secured 51 first preferential votes. Now that is why the quota formula is important. I hope that all of you are following this. Right, this is what has been given in almost all text, and I'm just trying to decipher them. right? So that you're not lost in it, to get conceptual clarity. We never know where the question can come into, Of course, they will not ask this question, but I feel that since from past 5 to 6 years, he has never asked any question on the president. He has only concentrated on the constitutional provisions. He has asked 1 or 2 questions on the parliament, but he has never asked any question on the president. But then we should not neglect it. We never know, any type of question can come into. Okay, anyway, let's come back to this. So even in this case, none of them has secured 51 first preferential votes. The person who has got the least first preference is C here, and B here, and E is eliminated. So A gets eliminated and B gets eliminated. So what happens is second preference gets converted into first preference, and that gets divided between these two. And finally, we assume that D has won the election is because he has crossed this first 51 first preferential votes. Please do understand, I have just taken 1 person is equal to 1 vote. But in reality, 1 person is equal to many votes is depending on this formula. If you can see here, 1 vote of an MLA and 1 vote of an MP. Now, if you are trying to ask me a question that what if it is a tie? Tie will never happen. Please do understand, the system, the process, the formulas are designed in such a fashion that tie can never happen. Reason is the quota itself will be like a 5-digit number, 4 or a 5-digit number. Therefore, there is no chance of having a tie at all. Right? So therefore, you should be rest assured that there is no chance of a tie, and this is how the election of the president shall be conducted. Right? So well, let's move ahead with the next important thing. Okay, so what are the qualifications to stand for the presidential election or to become a president? The first one is the citizen of India. I think this slide should have come first and then we should have gone into the election procedure of the president. Never mind. Okay, so the qualification of the president, the first one is citizen of India. Here, what sort of citizen? Citizenship by birth, descent, registration, naturalization or acquisition of territory, any kind. Now, if there is any question which says that there is a foreigner who has become an Indian citizen, can he contest for the election of the president? The answer is yes. If he is a citizen of India, yes. Because there is no different class of citizenship which is provided by the Constitution of India. It only mentions about the citizen of India. That is all. Next is 35 years of age. We consider the president to be senior. What happens is in the case of Lok Sabha, it's 25, Rajya Sabha is 30. So the president and the governor are considered to be seniors, considered to be the constitutional heads respectively of the center, that's of the entire country and also the state. Therefore, there is always a 5 years gap between the seniors house to that of the president, so which is 35 years. Next, qualified, and of course, but then what's the reality? We always see all the president which is at least 35 into 2. Right? Now we have a president right now which is less than that of it. And we are happy that somebody who is younger than that of 70 has become the president of India. Anyway, now we have never seen any person who was at the age of 40 or 35 who have become, or at least between 35 to 40 who have become the president of this country. The next one is qualified to be a member of Lok Sabha. Please do understand, it means that the same qualification as that of the member of Lok Sabha. Same qualification means that he shall be a citizen of India, should have attained 25 years of age, but then in this case 35 years of age, and shall not hold any office of profit, which is the next one, and he shall not be undischarged insolvent, and then he shall not be somebody who has resulted in some kind of a conviction. Okay, so all of that are some of the other qualifications which are given to a Lok Sabha member. So the same thing is applicable to the president. Now, why it is not Rajya Sabha, why it is Lok Sabha is because the president is more, seeing the actions of Lok Sabha. And one more thing is, you should always understand, the president gets more of his hand towards Lok Sabha than that of Rajya Sabha, because the vice president is already there as the chairman of the Rajya Sabha. So that's the reason behind it. And therefore, in that of the qualifications of the vice president, you will see that it is qualified as a member of Rajya Sabha. So that's where the qualification comes in for him. So the next one is no office of profit. The office of profit has two meanings. That's not holding two government positions at a time. The second one is not using the office for profitable means or profitable means, right? So you should not use it like, a profit motive for your own sense or somebody else who's very closer to you. So that's where the office of profit comes into. So, well, these are the qualifications of the president. Well, when we are discussing about the election of the president, I forgot to mention certain important things. Now, related to election dispute of the president, it can only happen, or it can be only challenged in the case of the Supreme Court of India. And that is through an election dispute. It cannot be challenged in any high court. So, especially the president and the vice president election. Now, both the president as well as the vice president election can never be challenged in any high court. It has to be challenged in the Supreme Court only. Number two, supposing if the president is impeached, if he is impeached in any case, or if the Supreme Court has nullified, that he is corrupt, or if he has elected through some fraudulent means, the actions done by the president before, till his office, shall never be invalidated. What do you mean by that? Those things what he has signed, the bills what he has signed, that cannot be invalidated, though the Supreme Court has already said that he has got elected through fraudulent means, right? So you should always understand, even then, even if he is impeached, or if his election is called as a fraud, if it is nullified, the actions done by the president before the judgment shall never be invalidated. So these are some of the important things what you need to understand related to the election of the president and the certain things associated with this impeachment as well. So let's move ahead with the next important thing. Of course, impeachment. Now, what do you mean by impeachment? Removal of a constitutional authority. Removal of a constitutional authority is called as an impeachment. Now, who is the constitutional authority here who has been impeached? It's the president, right? And what is the grounds which the Constitution says is ground of removal is violation of the Constitution. So there is none of the other ground which is mentioned in the Constitution of India. It's only on the violation of the Constitution. Article 61 of the Indian Constitution very clearly speaks about the impeachment procedure. Well, it shall be initiated in the either house of the Parliament. So that is the impeachment procedure can be initiated in either house of the Parliament. It can be initiated either in Rajya Sabha, or it can also be initiated in Lok Sabha. And once it is initiated in one of the house, it shall contain at least 1/4 member signature, and a 14 days notice has to be served to the president. When a 14 days notice is served to the president, after that the president can ask one of his aide, and that's the Attorney General, to be there, in order to give the reply to it, or he can only give his own reply to it, right? And this can happen supposing if the other house, right, shall constitute an investigative committee. Otherwise, it's not necessary for the president to go to the investigative committee and then put forward his argument to it. Until and unless the investigative committee is formed, you need not have to worry about it. Well, if the investigative committee is formed by the Parliament and then it wants a reply from the president, then he can defend himself. He can also send the Attorney General to defend himself, being the first legal officer. That can also happen. Well, but then each house, if they pass it with a special majority, which is 2/3 majority of each house. What is 2/3 majority here? It's 2/3 majority of the total strength. Sometimes this is also regarded as effective majority, because D.D. Masu says that it's an effective majority. So, well, it is 2/3 majority of the total strength of the house. For example, if it is Lok Sabha, it is 2/3 of 543. If it is Rajya Sabha, it's 2/3 of 245. Please do understand, here the nominated members participate in the impeachment procedure of the president. However, they do not participate in the election of the president. And one more thing which you should also understand, which I mentioned there, is 2 legislative assemblies, MLAs, do participate in the election of the president. Who are they? That's from Pondicherry, and the other one is New Delhi. Okay, since the Election Commission of India has not notified anything with respect to Jammu and Kashmir, so therefore for time being we will not take Jammu and Kashmir. So once it is notified, it is also Jammu and Kashmir which participates in the election of the president as well. And one more thing, what is very, very important here, which you should always remember, that in any case, the other, that is the MLCs, that's the state legislature councils, the member of the legislature councils would never participate in the election of the president. Why they don't participate? Because already they are indirectly elected from another indirectly elected body. That's the reason they are not participating in the election of the president. Moreover, it is not equivocally present throughout entire India. This is the argument. They are not equivocally present in entire India. Only few states have state legislature council. Around 6 states has state legislature council. Not all of them will have a state legislature council. The second important thing what you need to understand is it's always dependent on proportional representation system. The president's election is always dependent on the proportional representation system. Well, we saw that proportional representation system in the case of the election. We cannot see it in the case of impeachment. Therefore, the nominated members do participate in the impeachment procedure of the president. MLCs also do not participate here. It's all the members of the parliament. It's all members of the parliament who participate in the election of the president. And once it is done, when each house passes with a special majority, which is 2/3 of each house, then the president stands impeached. Let's move ahead. Okay, so let's try to understand about the powers of the president. What are the powers of the president? Let's try to understand about the powers of the president. The very first power is the executive power. So, well, according to the Supreme Court's judgment, what do you mean by an executive power? So, according to the Supreme Court's judgment, any power which is related to formulation of public policy. Anything which is related to implementation of this public policy. Anything which is related to maintenance of stability and order. Next, anything which is responsible for establishment of welfare state. Anything which is responsible for any policy which is responsible for economic and social development shall be regarded as an executive power. So who holds the executive power in this country? It's always the President of India who holds the executive power in this country. So please do remember this. So anything which is related to formulation of a public policy is something which is like a program, implementation of this program, and then maintenance of law and order, maintenance of stability and order, of course, establishment and giving more importance, facilitating welfare state, to facilitate welfare state. So what is welfare state? Welfare state is a state which gives highest importance to welfare-oriented programs. Any policy which provides importance to that of economic and social development. So what's the difference between these two? Economic development is related to removal of poverty, removal of unemployment. Social development is related to removal of social stigma. So any policy which is responsible or any action which is responsible to do so, all of them are regarded as executive power, because executive is the one who is responsible for implementation of rules and regulation. Executive is the one who is responsible for execution of a law. So a law consists of any of these things, and therefore it is regarded as an executive power. So what are the executive powers of the president? Now, whenever we speak about the executive powers of the president, these are the ones which we normally see it as executive powers. The very first one is taking executive actions. All these executive action is based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, and all of these things are based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. Very first one, rules specifying orders and other instruments to be made. Now, which are these rules? This rules is with respect to the administration of the union. I repeat, it is with respect to the administration of the union. He is responsible for appointing the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers under Article 75 of the Indian Constitution. And then he is responsible for appointment of Attorney General. He does not elect it, he appoints it. He appoints the Attorney General and then also determines his remuneration, not a salary. So we will discuss about it a bit later whenever we discuss about the Attorney General. He is responsible for appointing Comptroller and Auditor General, the Chief Election Commissioner and the other election commissioners, the chairman and the members of Union Public Service Commission. All governor of the states shall be appointed by the President based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. The chairman and the members of the Finance Commission, you all know that the President, if he feels that he needs to assess the financial situation of this country, then what he does is he is responsible for constituting a Finance Commission where he appoints the chairman and the members of the Finance Commission. Then he is also responsible for seeking information on administrative affairs of the union, where the administrative affairs of the union is very, very important, is because this administrative affairs of the union will always help in giving an idea of what's happening in the union. Well, apart from that, he can form a commission to investigate the condition of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe and also other backward classes. He can also constitute a special officer of linguistic minority to assess the condition of the linguistic minority. Well, he is also responsible for constituting interstate council, and he can also declare any area as a scheduled area. So all of them do come under the executive power of the President. And well, when we are discussing about the executive power of the President, we should also understand that these things are based on aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. And is the President bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister? Yes, he is bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. This is very, very important for us to understand. Okay, all right. So apart from that, let's move ahead with the next important thing, and that's the legislative power. Now, what are the legislative powers of the President? So one of the most important article which we need to remember is Article 79 of the Indian Constitution, which very clearly speaks about what is the Parliament. The Parliament comprises of Lok Sabha plus Rajya Sabha plus the President. So the President is also an integral part of the Parliament according to the Constitution of India. So what he does related to it, he can summon the House of the Parliament. What is summoning? Summoning is calling for a session, right? He can summon anybody based on the advice of the Council of Ministers or otherwise. He can summon any person or summon the House of Session. Next, prorogue. Prorogue is nothing but ending each session. It's like a temporary recess, or it's a recess between one session to the other session. The gap what we see from the end of first session to the commencement of the next session is called as the prorogue. Now, normally we have 3 sessions in the Parliament. The very first session is called as the budget session. The second one is called as the monsoon, and the third one is as the winter. The third one is called as the winter. So the gap between monsoon to winter is again prorogue. The gap between the budget to that of monsoon is also called as prorogue. He addresses the very first session of Lok Sabha. What do you mean by this? After the election, the very first session would be addressed by the President of India. When he is addressing this first session, he is reading out the speech. The speech contains the policies and programs of the Government of India for the next complete year, and also the plans and programs which the government wants to implement in this nation. He can send the messages to the Parliament. This acts like a discretionary power. So one of the most important power which he has is sending messages to the Parliament. So what sort of message it is? It is his own prerogative. And one more thing what you need to understand is he can also address a joint sitting and call for a joint sitting. Okay, so when he is addressing a joint sitting or calling to address for a joint sitting, it can act in his own discretion. Okay, and apart from that, you can also send messages to the Parliament. Now, there is a case wherein Pranab Mukherjee had sent a message to the parliament that he said that the ruling party and the opposition party were wasting the valuable time in the parliament which is given by the people of this country. So he said that it's better that the parliamentarians concentrate on making bills and laws and engage in qualitative discussions instead of protesting inside the parliament and then having a verbal spat inside the parliament. He also said about the decorum of the parliament. So these are all the messages. Well, the messages sent by the president, it is his own discretionary. It is his own discretionary power. There is nothing as such which is binding on anybody. At the same time, he is not bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. In most of these cases, he is based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. In some cases, it is not. While in summoning the session, it is discretion also. And in most of the cases, it is based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. How it becomes is discretion. For example, if there is a government which has lost its majority, imagine, and this government does not want to call for a session. It does not want to summon a session. It's because if this session is summoned, if they are attending the session, they might have to prove their majority. They are avoiding to prove their majority. In those cases, the president cannot listen to them because there is one constitutional obligation which is given to the president. And what is that? For the parliament has to meet at least twice in a year. And it should meet and it should have a meeting once in every 6 months. The responsibility to see that the parliament meets once in 6 months is with the president. So this is a constitutional obligation which the president has, right? One of the constitutional obligation is to make sure that the parliament meets at least once in every 6 months. So it means that twice in a year and with a gap of 6 months, right? If they don't do so, then it is a constitutional obligation on the part of the president to make sure the parliament meets it. So supposing if an adamant government which is at the brink of losing its majority, if it is trying to delay this, then the president need not have to pay advice to them. He can use his discretion and call for the summoning. And if they fail to prove their majority, then he can definitely take an action against them and then make sure that he can dissolve the Lok Sabha. So he has the right to dissolve the Lok Sabha. Dissolving the Lok Sabha is again based on the president's discretion, supposing if at all, if the ruling party which has failed the majority is not trying to saying that it does not dissolve the session, dissolve the house, it's not liking the dissolving the house. However, you should understand that dissolution shall happen once in 5 years. Okay, so this is what it is when we speak about the summoning or prorogue and also the dissolution. Well, sending the messages to the parliament, it is his own discretion. Circumstances makes summoning discretion. Nomination of 12 members to Rajya Sabha, it is not Lok Sabha. Beg your pardon, it's not Lok Sabha, it's Rajya Sabha. And this is from literature, science, arts and social service. So nomination of 12 members to Rajya Sabha is from literature, science, arts and social service. There is no sports in it, but then still why sports personalities have been nominated in Rajya Sabha? The reason is it becomes the will of the parliament. And at the face of it, though it looks like the violation of the constitution, we do not think of encroachment of any fundamental rights of any citizen. Basically we definitely feel that this is nowhere hampering our rights. So therefore, though it looks like violation of the constitution, but then it has become the will of the parliament, and since we have not taken to the Supreme Court and challenged that in the part of the judicial review, therefore this continues as it is. However, the Constitution of India has only said literature, science, arts and social service. Now why is this 12 members? They provided different dimensions in making a bill. in the formulation of the bill. So that's the reason, and Rajya Sabha is also considered to be a specialized house and also a senior chamber. Next, it decides on any question of the disqualification of an MP, and it's also in sync with that of the anti-defection law. You should also remember about the anti-defection law is because questions have come in the past related to anti-defection law as well. Next, prior permission to the introduction of any bill is taken is because the most important bills require a prior recommendation of the President for its introduction in the House of the Parliament. For example, in the previous session, we've already seen that a bill which needs to create a new state, a bill which needs to alter the boundary of a state, it requires a prior recommendation of the President. The bill which is a money bill, it requires a prior recommendation of the President. A bill which is a financial bill requires a prior recommendation of the President. So, some of the most important bill, a bill which creates a different meaning of right to property, requires a prior recommendation of the President. The bill which tries to speak about the definition of agricultural income requires a prior recommendation of the President. Right? So the most important bills in this country, except the constitutional amendment bill, it requires the prior recommendation of the President. So you can also assume this line here that the most important bills require the prior recommendation of the President, and that also justifies the position of the President with respect to the Parliament. It is also a justification which says that the President is an integral part of the Parliament. Well, the next one is the ordinance. Now, talking about the ordinance, ordinance are temporary legislation. Why ordinance are being used? Ordinances are being used. It is being passed whenever the Parliament is not in session, right? Now, you should always understand that whenever the Parliament is not in session, it creates a vacuum. Now, whenever there is a vacuum, it means that it affects the goods and services of this country. It affects the mentality of the citizen. It affects the society at a large. Now, why are these bills are necessary? The bills are the preludes to a law. The law leads to a lot of services to this nation. It provides the economic and development policy, it provides a public policy, or it provides any kind of program. It helps in upliftment of the poor. It helps the have-nots to get the have. Right? That is to provide the basic necessary, right? So therefore, in order to provide amenities, the laws are extremely necessary. In order to govern the nation, the laws are extremely necessary. So therefore, ordinances are provided in the Constitution, and the constitutional head, that's the President being the constitutional head, he is responsible for promulgation of these ordinances. However, what we need to understand is these ordinances are promulgated by the President based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the PM. So this is not a discretion. So it is a temporary legislation which carries the same weightage as that of any legislation in the Parliament, introduced by the President when the Parliament is not in session, based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. But then there are certain conditions with respect to it. It can have a maximum time period of 6 months and 6 weeks as given in Lakshmikant. Why it is 6 months and 6 weeks? Please do understand, ordinances, see, according to the Constitution of India, the Parliament has to meet once in 6 months, assuming that the maximum time period is 6 months here. And if you say that the ordinance have been introduced on that day, within 1.5 month after its reassembly, the ordinances has to be ratified. So once the ordinances has been introduced, within 1.5 months after the reassembly of the Parliament, it has to be ratified. Let's say the ordinances was introduced yesterday, and that's on, I think yesterday's date is 11th, I think. So today's date is 12th. So let's say if this is 12th, right, and 12th is where the Parliament has met, right? From this date, they count on 1.5 month, exactly 6 weeks, right, within which the Parliament has to ratify this. If they don't ratify, the ordinance fails, the ordinance gets nullified. Otherwise, this will not become an act. So therefore, the word called as temporary legislation is being used. So these are the conditions what you need to understand with respect to the ordinance. And the ordinance making power of the President, right, you know, it is immune from judicial review to an extent, is because what sort of an advice is given by the Prime Minister to the President cannot be challenged in any court of law. So therefore, it is immune to a judicial review. However, the ordinance which was used to deviate the constitution is not immune from the judicial review. You can definitely ask a question on this in the judiciary, and it is subjected to the judicial review on the constitutional obligation. All right. So any report. So the President is a cause to lay the report of C&AG. C&AG is Comptroller and Auditor General, who is responsible for acting like an auditor and maintenance of accounts of the state, because the maintenance of accounts of the center is done by another officer called as Comptroller General of Accounts. Well, UPSC, any report of UPSC, the President is a cause to lay the report of UPSC. Finance Commission, the President is cause to lay the report of the Finance Commission, and any other report in the Parliament. But then these are the most important report what you need to understand. And he is also cause to lay the annual financial statement. Apart from that, he is cause to lay the annual financial report. That is the annual financial statement before the Parliament. So the most important reports where he is caused to lay for it, it is the C&AG report, UPSC report, it's the Finance Commission, it's also the annual financial statement, because this has been asked in the previous year. There was one question which was asked in 2013 or 2014. It's report to related to the President, which said the President is a cause to lay the report of which among the following, right? And then the option goes like 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 3, and all of that, right? You should remember these four, especially C&AG, UPSC, Finance Commission, and also, right, annual financial statement. Okay. And he is responsible for constitution of Finance Commission once in every 5 years, right? However, this does not look like a legislative power. It's not a legislative power, but then this is constituting Finance Commission, which is seen as an executive power. This is an executive power. So let's move ahead with this. Talking about the judicial powers, judicial powers are again executive powers here. But then, so in some textbooks it has been used, some guides it has been used that it is a judicial power. So the appointment of the CJI and the Supreme Court judges and the judges of the High Court is based on the President. So the President, so what's the appointment done here? How do you appoint the judges, especially the Supreme Court judges and the High Court judges? It is through a system called as collegium system. I'll just give you an understanding of it immediately, so that when we are doing about the judiciary, there should not be any doubt in this. So Supreme Court judges and the High Court judges, they are appointed through a collegium system. This collegium system comprises of Chief Justice of India plus 3 to 4 senior most judges of the Supreme Court. Normally it comprises of 4 other Supreme Court judges. Now what they do is they recommend this to the cabinet. So they recommend a name to the cabinet. Okay, so this is where there is nothing as such which is mentioned in the Constitution. Collegium system is a system which was evolved by the judges themselves. That's by the Honorable Supreme Court. Well, therefore, there is no, constitutional provisions with respect to it. The Constitution is absolutely mum with respect to this. It only says that the judges of the High Court, Supreme Court are appointed by the President. But then this is a process which the Honorable Supreme Court evolved over a period of time. So collegium system recommends a name to the cabinet. If the cabinet does not like this name, it can ask the collegium system to support or give some other name. Now this is where it has resulted in some kind of a friction between the collegium system and the cabinet, right? And this has resulted in some kind of a dilution as well, right? It's because there is no stipulated time period in which the collegium system has to suggest a name. There is no stipulated time period in which the cabinet also has to suggest this name to the President. So once this gets okayed, it goes to the President. And the President then appoints the Supreme Court judges and the High Court judges. So this is a process in which the High Court judges and the Supreme Court judges have been appointed. So this is what we need to remember. So it's based on the collegium system. So collegium system, which comprises the Chief Justice of India and four other Supreme Court judges, they suggest a name, they recommend it to the cabinet. The cabinet recommends the name to the President, because the President is bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. He appoints the Supreme Court and the High Court judges. And once done, then the Supreme Court and the High Court judges are appointed. Removal of Supreme Court judges and High Court judges are done by the Parliament based on the recommendation of the President only. Without the recommendation of the President, without the President recommending the bill, you cannot remove the Supreme Court or the High Court judges. Of course, the ground of removal is violation of the Constitution. That is a violation of the grounds of the grounds of removal is violation of the Constitution, and the other one is proven misbehavior, right? These are the two things, incapacity and misbehavior, basically it is. So that's violation of the Constitution and misbehavior. Well, moving ahead with other important power, it seeks pardon, reprieve, respite, remission or commutation. So this is considered to be one of the important power, also called as clemency. This is one power which we need to understand, is because there are a lot of ifs and buts with respect to it. You know, it was also constantly in news recently, is because there was a case of a lady from Gujarat who was, I think the name is, I forgot the name of this. There's a lady from Gujarat, you know, who had applied a case with the Supreme Court, is basically because she was gang raped, and then after which, you know, they applied for a clemency after, you know, they were subjected to the punishment. And then they received a red carpet welcome, is because the President granted them the mercy petition. He gave pardon to them, and they were welcomed with a garland and everything. There was a festivity in the entire village, and the lady who was there in the village, she could not take it. Of course, it was a brutal, you know, act of crime, and justice delayed is justice denied is one end. And then the justice was not served, according to her, in this end, is, of course, if you know, a lady who was suffered such a humiliation and such an insult and such a barbaric act on her, she could not see somebody who has got the pardon, you know, after they have got, like, they have in jail for some years. So therefore, this was in news in 2023. Well, let's try to understand what's pardoning here. Let's try to understand how the pardoning is done and so on. Well, so talking about the pardoning power is based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. This is not a discretionary power. It's based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. Now, what happens is, after the aid and advice done by the Prime Minister, what it happens is it goes to, you know, the concerned authority. Well, before this, the Home Ministry shall take all the application related to clemency. It takes the application related to clemency. That's on the mercy petition. Now, after it takes the application that's related to clemency, Home Ministry forwards this to the Cabinet. The Cabinet takes a cognizance of this. The Cabinet takes a cognizance of this, and based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, once they decide this, what they do is they give it to the President, and President is obligated to listen to them. So, how does it start? It starts from clemency application, which is provided to the Home Ministry. Home Ministry scrutinizes the application, sends it to the Cabinet. The Cabinet, which is chaired by the Prime Minister, it scrutinizes the application and it passes to the President, and the President is bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So this is how the pardoning is done. But then there are certain jargons related to it. So what exactly is it? The jargons are, first is pardon. What is pardon here? Pardon is absolving crime of a person. The second one is reprieve. Reprieve is temporary suspension of the judgment. Next is respite. Respite is conversion of heavier sentence into lighter sentence. Heavier to lighter sentence on special ground. And then remission. Remission is lessening the sentence without changing the character. Without changing the character. Last one is commutation. What do you mean by commutation? Commutation is conversion of death sentence to life imprisonment. Conversion of death sentence into life imprisonment. So these are the important technical terms what we need to understand. What do you mean by pardon? Pardon is absolving crime of any person, so is set free. So if the president grants pardon, so he absolves the complete crime and is released once for all. So that's called as pardoning. What is reprieve here? Reprieve is temporary suspension of the judgment. For example, he is supposed to be hanged tomorrow. Supposing if it is a reprieve, it is suspended for 3 months or 4 months, something like that. So that's called as temporary suspension of the judgment. Next, respite. A heavier sentence is converted into a lighter sentence on special grounds. So how shall we understand this? See, whenever the court now gives an award, it's basically a judgment. It's a punishment there. You know, whenever we speak about punishment here, we have two types of punishment, two types of offense. One is called as a cognizable, the other one is called as non-cognizable. Now, the offenses which are serious are those which are considered to be cognizable offenses. And these cognizable offenses, you know, which are considered to be of serious nature. Now, what happens is, it can be of simple imprisonment. The court can give simple imprisonment to them. For example, if it is a robbery, or it is a criminal intimidation, or if it is an extortion, or it is a murder, or it is a dacoity, or it is a rape, or a sexual assault, or so on and so forth. So, it can be a simple imprisonment. Simple imprisonment means he is, sent to a jail, and then he is not subjected to any kind of physical stress or a strain. Okay, so he has to be in a jail, kept in captivity. That's a simple imprisonment. It might be for 5 years, or 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, or 10 years. Rigorous imprisonment is where he shall be in jail and is also subjected to some kind of physical stress or a strain. So it might be for 7 years, 5 years, depending on the nature of the crime as decided by the court of law. Next, the third one is called as a death sentence. So what is a death sentence? It's a capital punishment, as you all know. That's hanging. So in case of India, the death sentence happens only in the case of hanging. So there is no different types of death sentence, unlike in some other forward-looking countries, unlike in the case of United States of America, or some other countries which has different set of death sentence for different set of crime, different set of brutality of crime, or barbaric in nature, and so on and so forth. Well, the last one is called as the life imprisonment. Life imprisonment again is of two types. One is till his death, the other one is still 14 years. Okay. So, well, these are the 4 types of award or a judgment which is provided. Basically, a punishment which is provided to any person who is convicted in the court of law. Not a suspect. Suspect once he's been convicted in the court of law, then he gets this kind of punishment. So, talking about the respite here, a person who is facing a rigorous imprisonment of 8 years, right? And let's say that he is a lone breadwinner of the family, and he has to take care of around 5 to 6 children, right? In that case, the court can take his cognizance. I mean, the executive can take the cognizance of it. I beg your pardon, it's not the court, it's the executive. That's the president. The president can take the cognizance of it, and he can. When I say the president here, please do understand the procedure behind it, because this application has to be first forwarded to the Home Ministry. It goes to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister has advised this to the President. The Cabinet has advised this to the President. So, President taking the cognizance of it, he uses respite. What is a special ground? That he is a lone breadwinner of the family, and he is in, he is having a heavier sentence of 7 years of rigorous imprisonment, and that gets converted into 3 or 4 years of simple imprisonment, after which he can be released. Okay, I hope all of you understood this, the meaning of special ground. Or let's say that there is a lady who has been arrested, and then she's already been convicted, but after 3 months, they get to know that she is pregnant, then owing to the special ground, her sentence would be reduced from, let's say, from 5 years or 6 years to that of 2 years or 3 years, so that after that she can take care of her family. That's basically her kid. So that's an example of respite on special ground. Next, remission. Remission is lessening the sentence without changing the character. So what do you mean by that? Supposing if the character is of if it is rigorous imprisonment of 7 years, rigorous imprisonment of 7 years is lessened to that of 5 years or 4 years as decided by the President. Right, here they do not take any special ground into consideration. Maybe the character will be taken into consideration. Last but not the least is a commutation. Whenever the President commutes, it means that you should understand that it is conversion of a death sentence into a life imprisonment. Conversion of heavier sentence to a lighter sentence is normally called as commutation. Supposing if this is done on special ground, it becomes respite. However, in the respite, we will not see the conversion of death sentence into life imprisonment. If it is conversion of death sentence into life imprisonment, it shall be only commutation. So these are certain important things what you need to understand with respect to the judicial powers of the President and also the clemency powers of the President. One of the diplomatic powers what the President has is all international treaties and agreements. They are all signed in the name of the President. So like how all rules for this nation are made in the name of the President, likewise all these important powers that's related to the international treaties, that is also done by the President, in the name of the President. Let's move ahead with the next important topic, and that's on the veto powers of the President. So what are these veto powers? How shall we define this term called as a veto? Veto is nothing but stalling a bill from becoming an act. Okay, so a process which stalls a bill from becoming an act, which is undertaken by the chief executive, the union executive, is called as a veto power. Basically, here the President stalls the process of a bill from becoming an act, right? However, whenever a bill is a prelude to a law, whenever a bill is passed by the Parliament and when it reaches to the President can use either one of this. He can give an assent to the bill. Okay, when he is giving an assent to the bill, it means that he has already authenticated it. The bill has become an act. He can withhold an assent to the bill. For some reason, he can say that I'm withholding an assent to the bill. I can't give this, right? Return the bill once for consideration, right? Because under Article 74, you should understand with the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1978, introduced this only once for reconsideration. Before that, it was never there. So, during Indira Gandhi's tenure, the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act introduced the word called shall act in accordance with. These words made obligatory on the part of the President to act according to the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. Well, after that, the next Janata government did not reinstate the President to its original position. Instead, what it did was it diluted his position. It was the same thing as that of the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act in this Article 74, wherein it mentioned, they added a phrase called as returning the bill only once for reconsideration. The President does not like any advice given by the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. He can only send this bill only once. He can ask the Council to reconsider it. The President can ask only once. He can send the bill, send the advice only once for the reconsideration. So, whenever the bill gets, if he feels that he wants to somehow, stall the bill from becoming an act, that's where the veto power comes into. So, let's try to understand. So, in the world, we have 4 types of veto powers. Which are they? The first one is called as an absolute veto. The second one is called as the qualified. The third one is called as suspensive. The fourth one is called as pocket veto. So what do you mean by absolute veto? Absolute veto is a veto which was used in the case of United Kingdom. Now, this veto is not used in the case of United Kingdom after the existence of the cabinet system. So the existence of cabinet system has completely taken off the absolute veto power there. So what really happens here? Once the President says no to a bill, notwithstanding any vote in the Parliament, the bill is a strict no. So an absolute veto is a veto where the President withholds the bill who can reject the bill n number of times. Once he says no, it's a no. So this is a process in which a president feels that the bill has certain malady, or if he feels that it goes against the public importance. Well, the next question is, are we using it in case of India? Yes. The President of India uses absolute veto in only two circumstances. The first circumstance is when, let's say, that the governor has reserved a bill for the consideration of the President. So, meaning an absolute veto power can be exercised by the President in the case of the state bills. Can't he do it on the bills which are done in the parliament? He can also do it. We'll go to the second case after discussing this. So what happens is, once the governor has reserved the bill for the consideration of the president, because this is a state bill, if he feels that the state bill has some, he wants the president to take a cognizance of this. So therefore, once he does it, it's up to the president to decide on the status of this bill. If he uses an absolute veto, what is absolute veto? Completely rejecting the bill, withholding an assent to the bill, come what may. So it also means that notwithstanding any vote in the parliament, even if you, pass this bill n number of times in the Parliament of India, you cannot override the power of this veto once exercised by the president. So therefore, the president has an absolute veto power with respect to the state bill. Once the governor reserves the bill for the president only. If and only if. If and only if the governor reserves the state bill for the consideration of the president, in that case, the president has every right to use an absolute veto power. Okay. What's the second case here where he uses an absolute veto power? The second case is where, let's say that the bill is pending before the president. It's pending. For some reason, it's pending. The bill is passed from Rajya Sabha, Lok Sabha, it goes to the president. The president is out of station, or, he says that he'll sign the bill tomorrow or something like that. During this process, the Lok Sabha stands dissolved. So what happened? Lok Sabha is dissolved. So since the Lok Sabha is dissolved, there's a different government altogether. Of course, whenever the Lok Sabha stands dissolved, the president looks for an alternative before calling for an election. So it's a party which has lost a majority. Okay. And because they have not completed their 5 years of tenure. The otherwise is, they have to complete 5 years of tenure in the Lok Sabha and then they go for an election. So this is not that case. So what he has done, what has happened immediately after this, in 1 or 2 days, there is a new government. And the new government is formed, and there is a cabinet which is headed by the PM. And this cabinet which is headed by the PM is a different party altogether. The PM here can advise the president to use an absolute veto, where he can use an absolute veto. So look at this. When the president is using an absolute veto, still he is depending on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. We really don't understand the logic of why it is called as an absolute veto. Anyway, so this is another circumstance where an absolute veto is being used. Okay. So next is qualified veto, and this is a veto which is used in United States of America. This is a relic of United States of America, and we do not see it in case of India. So we do not use qualified veto power, right? What it means is, once the president uses his veto power, the legislature overrides the veto power through a special majority, which is nothing but 2/3 majority. So it is overridden by the legislature with a 2/3 majority. So that is why it is called as a qualified veto. Okay. So the next one is called as suspensive veto. This is a relic of France. It's used in the case of France. And what happens here is, once the president uses the veto power, the legislature overrides with a simple majority, which is more than half of it. So since it uses through a simple majority, then it means that it is a suspensive veto. We use it in case of India. Both of these cases are used in case of India. Suspensive veto is also used in the case of India. Next is pocket veto. What do you mean by pocket veto? Pocket veto is delay in giving an assent to the bill. It's delay in assenting a bill. So what it feels like, see, the president is making the bill to lie on his table for some reason, is not taking any action on the bill. So that's called as a pocket veto. There are cases in the past which pocket veto was used by the president because of trivial issues, because of ego clashes between the president and the prime minister. One instance or one example which we can note on this is of Jani Jail Singh and Rajiv Gandhi. Jani Jail Singh was on a Central Asian visit, and he was on a foreign visit, and for some reason the cabinet did not approve of his foreign visit. Normally whenever the president goes, his expenditure is everything, his expenditure and everything will be bared by the government of India, and the cabinet should also approve the foreign visit of the president. So in this case, the foreign visit of the president was not approved. Jani Jail Singh happens to be a kitchen cabinet member of Indira Gandhi once upon a time, and he was considered to be one of the close aide of Indira Gandhi. So he did not like Rajiv Gandhi did not approve his foreign visit. What he does is, angered by it, he uses a pocket veto. That is the bill which has been passed by both the houses of the parliament. It's a government bill, and it is on the table of the president, and the president is using an pocket veto where he is not taking any action on the bill. The bill is lying on his table. The principal secretary of PMO, that's of Rajiv Gandhi, calls up the secretary of the president. The president also has a secretariat called as the President Secretariat, and it will be headed by a secretary there, normally an IAS officer again. So he informs the principal secretary that the president is angry about his foreign visit not being approved. So when Rajiv Gandhi gets to know about this, that's when he calls for a cabinet meeting and then finally approves the foreign visit of the president, and the president signs the pocket veto. Now the point here is the ego clashes between the prime minister and the president might lead to detrimental things for the nation, because at the end of the day, if the bill will not become a law, it means that you are delaying the process of administrative machinery. If you delay a process of administrative machinery, that's where the administration suffers and also the governance suffers. So this is about the veto powers of the president. Since we have already discussed about the pardoning power of the president, I think we need not have to again go through it. I think I've already told you what exactly is pardon: reprieve, respite, remission and commutation. Well, there is one thing what we need to understand is a difference between the pardoning power of the president and the governor. The governor also enjoys a similar kind of pardoning power, okay, like that of the president. First of all, in case of the president grants pardon, reprieve, respite, remission, commutation in the case of violation of union list and also concurrent list, needless to mention. And the governor does the same thing, that is pardon, reprieve, respite, remission, commutation in the case of the state list, needless to mention concurrent list as well. So on concurrent list, both of them have the power to do the pardoning, okay. So while in the case of the president can pardon a death sentence, he can pardon it. While the governor cannot pardon a death sentence, he can only commute a death sentence. What do you mean by commuting a death sentence? He can only convert a death sentence into a life imprisonment. That is what it is. So the president can pardon a death sentence. The governor does not have any power to pardon a death sentence. Instead, he can only commute a death sentence. Okay. Apart from that, all of these military codes, the military codes function in a different way altogether. In fact, you cannot have a special leave jurisdiction related to the military codes. You cannot have a special leave petition related to military codes, and they can also not be challenged in any of the codes. However, there is only one way in which the court-martial cases can get a relief, and that's where they can bring it to the notice of the president. Supposing if it is appealed before the president can pardon the court-martial cases of the military codes. However, the governor does not have any of this power. So this is where you will find the difference between the pardoning power of the president and also the governor. Needless to mention that, the governor has a clear indication of state list and concurrent list. President has a clear indication of union list and the concurrent list. And he can grant pardon in case of death sentence. He will only commute a death sentence. And then related to the military courts, the president has the power to pardon a court-martial. He can grant pardon, reprieve, respite, remission, anything, but he can pardon a court-martial. While the governor does not enjoy any such power. Why the president enjoys this is because he's the chief commander of armed forces. That's the reason behind it. The supreme commander of armed forces. That's the reason behind it. Okay. So let's move ahead with the next topic. And the next topic is about the emergency powers of the president. And it speaks about the emergency provisions given in the Constitution of India. So first of all, emergencies are exigencies. Now, why are these exigencies important? Now, the administration cannot be conducted under, in a normal circumstances when the administration are conducted. The same thing cannot apply to the exigencies. So, therefore, there are certain provisions now which can be dealt in a different way altogether, and these are related to emergency provisions. According to the Constitution of India, the president can proclaim 3 types of emergency, and the first one is called as national emergency, the second one is called as a state emergency, and the third one is called as a financial emergency. The gist of it is, if the security of India is threatened, the sovereignty, integrity and unity of India is threatened, then the national emergency is applied, proclaimed by the president. Now, this can happen in the case of war or external aggression, or in the case of armed rebellion. So it can happen in any of these cases. While if you were to speak about the state emergency is in the failure of constitutional machinery. Now, the failure of constitutional machinery, you should not think that I have written about the chief minister. No, constitutional machinery it is. Okay, so the next one is financial emergency, if there is a financial crisis in India. So, national emergency is given under Article 352, state emergency 356 and also 365, financial emergency Article 360. These are the 3 important emergency powers which the president can proclaim. So let's move ahead with how the national emergency is proclaimed. As I mentioned, it is proclaimed in the case of war or external aggression or armed rebellion. Initially, the original constitution mentioned a term called as internal disturbance. The term called as armed rebellion was introduced in 44th Constitutional Amendment Act 1978. But then initially, the Constitution of India mentioned something called as internal disturbance. Of course, this is what I said in the previous class, that the term called as cabinet was introduced in the case of national emergency. When was it introduced? It was based on the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act 1978. The infamous emergency of 1975, which was proclaimed by the president while the prime minister during that time was Indira Gandhi. It was alleged that Indira Gandhi used internal disturbance. Now, there is no literal meaning, or the constitution does not define anything associated to internal disturbance. But then what we can understand about internal disturbance is that internal disturbance is any disturbance which happens in any part of India, where 2 or 3 people are quarreling, or something where an armed gang is quarreling, or any sort of disturbance where there is a group fighting amongst 2 or 3 groups or more than that. Therefore, in order to give a definite meaning to it, the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act, which was done by the Janata Party, came out with armed rebellion, which is more precise in meaning, is because it tells you that if there is an armed gang, then it can be an armed rebellion. So therefore, there are 2 types of national emergency which you can see here. These 2 are considered to be an external emergency, while this one is called as the internal emergency. So let's try to understand the procedure to proclaim a national emergency. So what is a procedure to proclaim a national emergency? The procedure to proclaim a national emergency is the precedents proclaimed based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. However, the written approval of the cabinet is much necessary, and this was added in 44th Constitutional Amendment Act 1978. I had already told about this in the previous session itself when we were discussing about the parliamentary system of democracy, when I was explaining about the cabinet form of the government. Please do understand, nowhere the original constitution mentions about the term called as cabinet. The term called as cabinet was introduced by the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act 1978 in Article 352 of the Indian Constitution, basically because it was said that the infamous emergency of 1975, using the original article of 74, which speaks about the aid and advice, it was believed that the Prime Minister during that time had misused her position and asked the President to proclaim an emergency. Therefore, in order to make sure that there shall be a concrete and a definitive version of proclaiming national emergency, therefore, this term called as cabinet approval, that's the written approval of cabinet, was introduced by the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1978. Once the emergency is proclaimed, the initial period of emergency is 1 month. Again, this was introduced in 44th Constitutional Amendment Act. The original constitution mentioned 2 months. Now, after this is done, the parliament has to ratify it with a special majority. And please do understand, in this case, there is also a clause. Supposing when the parliament, let's say that the Lok Sabha is dissolved. In that case, the Rajya Sabha has to ratify it in 1 month. And then the newly constituted Lok Sabha has to ratify the bill within 30 days after its reassembly. Now, this is a case when Lok Sabha is dissolved. So, this is a condition when the Lok Sabha is dissolved. Now, the special majority is a majority where it is two-thirds of the total strength, provided it is greater than half of the total membership of the House. The special majority which is being used here is 2/3 of the total strength, provided that is greater than half of the total membership of the House. This is not the time to discuss about what sort of majority and so on, but then please do understand that this is a special majority. So the parliament has to ratify the bill using a special majority, and once the parliament ratifies the bill with a special majority, the period of emergency continues for 6 months. Once in 6 months, the parliament has to ratify the bill so that it can be, continued for another 6 months. So this can be done for an indefinite period. It can continue for an indefinite period. So here there are certain clarity which you should need. What is the initial period of emergency? Initial period of emergency is 1 month. It's not 2 months. The original Constitution of India said it is 2 months. Now that's been replaced by 1 month. Of course, this was done by 44th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1978. And then initial period of emergency, the national emergency was done using a simple majority. Again, the original constitution mentioned about the simple majority. The Constitution of India, for proclamation of national emergency, the parliament's ratification had simple majority. It was changed to special majority. Again, this was changed using 44th Constitutional Amendment Act 1978. I'm trying to give you clarity on all of this so that you should not lose any of this, because on polity there are two set of things, because static comprises of around 50% and your current affairs topics, that comprises of your 50%. I'm trying to cover some of the current affairs whenever I'm doing those topics, like how we did it in case of CAA, how we did it in case of the Union Territories, and also in the case of Delhi and Pondicherry and so on. So but then in those cases, please do understand that without knowing the static portion, without understanding the statics logic, you will not be able to understand the current affairs part of it. So here, the logic is the simple majority was given in the original constitution, but then it was replaced by a special majority in the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act. Reason is to make sure that it becomes a tedious procedure. It becomes little more complex. It should not be very easy for an executive to proclaim a national emergency and then take an advantage. What is an advantage if you have a national emergency? The advantage, one of the most important advantages, is the Lok Sabha tenure can be increased for 1 year at a time. And the same thing holds good in the case of the State Legislative Assembly, where their tenure can also increase for 1 year at a time. But here, when I say definite period, once you ratify, you continue the emergency for 6 months. Again, for the next 6 months, you need to ratify. That for every 6 months, the Parliament needs to ratify, without which it does not go to an indefinite period. Okay? Right. So next. So let's try to understand the next part of it. So how do you revoke the emergency? The revocation of the national emergency. So revoking national emergency, again, the President's power here. Now, first of all, it does not require any Rajya Sabha. It requires Lok Sabha only. And this is done using a simple majority. And Rajya Sabha does not have any power at all. So how do you revoke a national emergency? The Lok Sabha has the power to revoke the national emergency, and this is using a simple majority. There is no power of Rajya Sabha, and there is no special majority which is required in order to revoke national emergency. Now, let's try to understand the consequences, that is the effects in the case of national emergency. What are the consequences? In the case of the executive sphere, you should always understand that the center-state relation gets affected. Especially the administrative relations get affected. In fact, all the states get a direction from the central government, the manner in which the administration has to be looked after, the manner in which the administration has to be conducted. The second one is in the legislative sphere, where the Parliament gets the power to make the laws on the state subjects, that is on the state list. The Parliament can make laws on the state list. Mind you, what is the most important thing which you have to remember here? The state legislative assemblies are not suspended. I repeat, the most important point here, what you have to remember is the state legislative assembly is not suspended in case of the national emergency. They are functioning. However, the Parliament has the power to make the laws on the state list. What about the money bill and also the financial bills passed in the state legislative assembly? Even the Parliament has a control over them. Now, this is where the entire country becomes unitary, is because this is not a normal circumstance. This is a special circumstance. Under special circumstances, normally it so happens that the exigencies require a special aspect of governance. Therefore, you have these kind of consequences, which is given by the emergency provisions in the Constitution of India. Well, the next one is the financial sphere, the center-state financial sphere. Of course, the center-state relation becomes unitary here. Right, it will be suspended. Related to center-state financial relations, here is where the central government can have supremacy over the state government as well, as I already told you in the case of the legislative as well as the executive. Next is the life of the Lok Sabha, which goes on for 1 year, and the life of the state legislative assembly, which also goes for 1 year, which I already told you, 1 year at a time. The tenure of Lok Sabha and the tenure of the State Legislative Assembly, it gets increased at 1 year at a time. The next important thing is on fundamental rights. There are two important articles which you have to remember under this provision, and that's Article 358 and 359. 358 is related to the suspension of fundamental rights by default. So, in case of war and external aggression, Article 19 automatically gets suspended, not in the case of the internal emergency. I repeat, in the case of external emergency, that's in the case of war or armed rebellion, under Article 358, there is a suspension of fundamental rights of Article 19, all of them, all the 6 of them, by default, whenever it is in the case of war or external aggression. While it is not in the case of internal emergency. So this is what Article 358 very clearly speaks about. While on Article 359, you should understand that if there is any fundamental right which has to be suspended, this requires an order by the President. So it means that this is done on a presidential order. Needless to mention, this presidential order is not applicable for Article 20 and 21, which is again the condition which was brought in the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act. In fact, Indira Gandhi's government, using the parliament, they had made it applicable for all fundamental rights, while the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act made sure that the Article 20 and 21 was exempted from this. So these two articles, that is right to life and liberty, is being completely and arbitrary arrest. These two were completely exempted from the presidential order. So the parliament that's using the presidential order, the president can remove any fundamental rights, and then related to this, anybody can approach to the Supreme Court, needless to mention. However, this remedy on the fundamental rights, and that is, subjugation of this. Now, I should not use the word subjugation, let's say, elimination or suspension of this fundamental rights is not applicable for Article 20 and 21. Needless to mention that it can be of any case. They can suspend any fundamental rights, not Article 20 and 21. So first it shall be the presidential order, and then followed with that of the Parliament's ratification. Without the Parliament's ratification, you cannot have a suspension of these fundamental rights. So Parliament's ratification is a must. Okay, so please do remember about the effect of the fundamental rights here, especially during the case of national emergency. Let's move ahead to the next topic. Okay, so the next one is a state emergency. Now, this is also called as the President's Rule. State emergency, also called as President's Rule. Now, there are two parts of it. One is Article 356, the other one is Article 365. Well, in the case of Article 356, it is failure of constitutional machinery. So, what are the cases of failure of constitutional machinery? Condition number one. If at all, if there is an election and none of them have got the majority and it is a hung assembly. And number two, even after seeking an alternative, the governor is not able to make sure that there is a government in place, right? So there is an hung assembly, and in that case, there is no alternative. Even after seeking the alternative, there is no other political party who are coming forward to do a coalition politics. In this, it becomes a failure of constitutional machinery. Number two, the failure of constitutional machinery is when, if the state fails to maintain the law and order, which has become detrimental, but just merely a failure of maintenance of law and order cannot become the procedure of Article 356, under which it cannot become a President's Rule. Now, because this is very clearly highlighted in the SR Bommai case. Okay. Next, number three, this is a case where the state legislative assembly, that is the state government using the state legislative assembly, is trying to overpower the power of the High Court. It is creating detrimental effect to the High Court. Even in this case, you can find that it becomes a failure of constitutional machinery. So, well, please do understand the failure of constitutional machinery shall happen in these three cases. The very first case is a hung assembly. Now, what happens in a case of the hung assembly is, supposing if none of the political parties are coming forward, what the governor can do is, the party which has commanded the highest seat, which has won the highest seat, even though it is not beyond the majority, let's say in the case of Karnataka, what the governor did was, the governor had given the opportunity to that of BJP without taking the alternative from the Congress and JDS during those times. So it is considered to be, against the constitution is basically because the experts say that first the governor should choose an alternative. Even when both of them were ready to form the government, and then when they were knocking the doors of the governor chose to give the opportunity to the BJP. Out of 224, BJP had won around 1 or 3, I guess. So, well, it was short by around 12 seats. Well, so what happens is, supposing if JDS and Congress in that time, or any other political party in Karnataka, was not able to form the government, in that case, it becomes constitutionally viable for the governor to provide an opportunity for BJP, and the leader of BJP, that political party, shall be chosen as the chief minister, and 1 month of time period shall be given to him so that he can prove the majority in the House of State Legislative Assembly. So this is a procedure which is also applicable in the case of the Parliament. Okay. So anyway, so let's move ahead with the proclamation of this emergency. The President's proclamation of emergency can be based on the report of governor or otherwise. So this is very, very important. See, in Article 356, it is not necessary that the report of governor is made compulsory. No, it is not. The report of governor is not a necessity at all. The President can seek the report of governor or otherwise. He can act according to the report of governor or otherwise, very clearly. So there is no obligation on the part of the President or the central government to take the advice of the governor here. They can act against this also. So the report of governor presents the condition of failure of constitutional machinery. So that's how the logic is. Well, when this is done, after which the President proclaims the emergency based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. And of course, this is after the approval of the Cabinet. There is no written approval of the Cabinet which is necessary here, but then the approval of the Cabinet becomes necessary. Now, this is in the case of the previous one in the national emergency, but then the written approval of Cabinet is not necessary in the case of the state emergency. So it's a mistake here. Sorry for this slide. Sorry for this phrase here, written approval of the Cabinet. There is no written approval of the Cabinet in the case of the state emergency. This is what we need to understand here. So the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers is merely enough, headed by the Prime Minister, is merely enough to proclaim a state emergency. What happens after the state emergency is proclaimed? The initial period of emergency is 2 months. This is what the Constitution has already prescribed. And within this 2 months, the Parliament has to pass it with a simple majority. Very, very important. It's not a special majority, because in the case of national emergency, it is a special majority. It is a simple majority, and the maximum period of emergency can be of 3 years. This simple majority has to be ratified by the Parliament once in every 6 months. Once in every 6 months. So, supposing if the President rule is continued beyond 1 year, the Election Commission of India shall certify why they are unable to conduct an election. This is another clause which you need to remember. The Election Commission of India has to provide a certificate of why the election cannot be conducted there, right? And then the maximum period of emergency can continue for 3 years, right? So the maximum period of emergency, that is the state emergency, is for 3 years. So this is how the procedure of state emergency is done. So moving ahead. Now, before we discuss about the financial emergency, let's try to understand the consequences of this. Now, what are the consequences in the case of the state emergency? Let me give you certain points here. The very first consequence, what you need to remember is the State Legislative Assembly is suspended. Now, unlike in the case of national emergency, the State Legislative Assembly is suspended, and the Parliament shall make law on the state list. The law on the state list with respect to that state is done by the Parliament of India. The Finance Minister of India, he presents the money bill and also the budget of the state concerned. Okay. And the governor takes all the important directions given by the central government, and that's from the President. So the governor becomes the most important authority to run the administration there in the event of the failure of constitutional machinery. Okay, so this is what we need to understand in the case of the consequences. So these are the consequences what we see in the case of state emergency. That's Article 356, not Article 365. Article 365, it is the same thing, but Article 365 shall happen. This is another important thing what we need to remember, the state emergency. What is failure to comply with the guidelines of the center? This is failure to comply with the guidelines of the center. See what happens according to the Constitution of India. So there is Article 257, 256, 257, 258, 259, which very clearly mentions about the coordination and cooperation of the states to the central government in the case of communication, in the case of transport. For example, if the national highways have to be built, the state government should always provide that cooperation and coordination to the central government, without which it cannot be done, right? Or if construction of any new railway bridges or the construction of any new railway tracks, all of that should be based on the support by the state government. Supposing the state government is not providing that cooperation, it means that they are failing to comply with the guidelines of the center. It can be considered as the failure to comply with the guidelines of the center. In those cases, it is rational for the President's rule to be applied on those states. However, this cannot be done in a very first instance. A warning shall be provided to them, and then after that, the President can proclaim a state emergency on these states, of course based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. But many a times Article 365 was misused by those ruling parties who are ruling at the center to control those states which had opposition political parties rule. Now, in a constitution, this is not considered to be a right way of administration, is because it goes against the Constitution of India. Well, so this is about the state emergency. Let's move ahead with the next one, which is the financial emergency. So the procedure of financial emergency is the same as that of the state emergency. However, article is 360. So initial period of emergency is 2 months, within which the Parliament has to ratify. And once it is ratified, it goes on for 6 months, and simple majority is required, and it can go for an indefinite period. So when does this financial emergency can be applied? In fact, it says that if the financial situation of India is threatened in any way, then the financial emergency can be proclaimed. So when we say that in any way, if the financial emergency is being is threatened, it means that it might be a liquidity crunch. But please do understand, we have had liquidity crunch at many a times, at many a years, but then India has never proclaimed financial emergency till date. The reason is, if we proclaim financial emergency, it results in bankruptcy. It results in crowding out. Now, most of these investments which are made in India, that results in crowding out. It's like we are declaring the entire world that we have become bankrupt, and it is also on the trust. It's also on the credibility of investments in India. Therefore, we have never proclaimed financial emergency so far, and we will also not do it. Okay, God forbid, it should not happen in this country. But then we will never do it is taking the conditions into consideration. I think this kind of situation will never come to India, taking all of these investments and so on. So this is a logic to understand a rationale behind why financial emergency have never been proclaimed so far. Well, what are the consequences of financial emergency? The consequences of financial emergencies are quite simple. The first consequence is the President can order or give direction the manner in which the financial property can be maintained. Financial property means is the way the prudency of finance has to be done, right? Number two is the Supreme Court judges, the High Court judges, the salaries of all constitutional authorities, including those who are working under the state government and also the central government, can be curtailed. Number 3 is the money bill and the financial bill which is passed by the states can be under the recommendation of the president. Number 4 is president can proclaim or provide any specific directions related to financial prudency and to review the financial situation in this country. So these are certain consequences what you see in the case of financial emergency. So that's about the different types of emergencies. That's on the national, state and financial emergency, and we've also discussed about the consequences of them. Okay, so let's move on with the next topic. He is also considered to be the real head, meaning he is the head of the government. So we have two heads here. One is the constitutional head, the constitutional head being the president. The other one is the head of the government. He is not the constitutional head, he is the head of the government. The head of the government being the Prime Minister. Please do understand, related to the Constitution of India, it does not mention any qualification for the Prime Minister. However, what we need to understand is, see, the Constitution is very, very clear that any person can become a Prime Minister without being elected. However, if any person has to continue in the position of the Prime Minister beyond 6 months, he has to be compulsorily elected. So that's where the Constitution is very clear on this. So talking about the appointment of the PM, the President is responsible for appointment. He appoints the PM, that is the Prime Minister, amongst the leader of the largest political party. He is responsible to be a Prime Minister. So it's very clearly mentioned that the leader of the majority party, he becomes the Prime Minister, and that's not based on the prerogativeness. The discretion by the President related to this shall happen only in the case of hung Parliament. So what happens here is, supposing if none of the political party has commanded the majority, then and also there is no alternative, then in that case the political party which has got the highest number of seats, that political party would be chosen by the President, and the President shall appoint the leader of that majority political party as the Prime Minister, and he gives him 1 month of time period to prove his majority in the House of Lok Sabha. Now, well, sometimes the critics argue that this provides an opportunity for horse trading and so on, but then this is considered to be constitutionally legal, is basically because it is considered to be constitutionally valid, is basically because the President is trying to find an alternative, because election becomes a costly affair. Let's move ahead with the functions of the Prime Minister. What are the functions of the Prime Minister? He is responsible for the appointment of the minister. Please do understand, the appointment of the ministers is based on the recommendation of the Prime Minister. Who appoints them? It's the President. Though the President appoints them, the recommendation of the Prime Minister is extremely important. If the Prime Minister does not provide any recommendation, that person shall not be appointed as a minister. So supposing if the President does it, it is considered to be against the Constitution, is basically because Article 75 is very clear that the minister shall be appointed based on the recommendations of the Prime Minister. Number 2 is, he is responsible for allocation and reshuffling of portfolios. Portfolios are subject matters, so each and every minister gets the portfolio depending on the wish of the Prime Minister, he being the captain of the ship. As the head of the cabinet, he is responsible for coordination, control, cooperation, etc. As the head of the cabinet, he exercises his leadership skills and makes sure that there is smooth functioning in the case of the union administration. Next, he is responsible for controlling and coordinating all of the activities in the ministry level and also at the department level. Supposing if there is any conflict within the cabinet meeting, he is responsible for resolving the same. Apart from that, he is also the chairman of Niti Aayog, the National Integration Council, and also the Interstate Council. So he is responsible to make sure that there is no problem with respect to the coordination and cooperation amongst various state governments. Being the head of the government in India, he is responsible for planning and also implementation of most of the important public policy in this country. Let's move ahead. So what is the relationship between the President and the Prime Minister? This is very, very important. The very first article is Article 74, which speaks about the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. Article 74 also very clearly says that the President is vested with the executive power, and the executive power of the union is exercised by the president based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the PM. And the second part of the article also says that the aid and advice tendered by the Prime Minister is completely immune from the judicial review. So you cannot challenge that in the court of law. You cannot challenge what is the aid and advice provided by the Prime Minister to the President. So it's completely immune from the judicial review. So this is what you need to understand. The next important article is the appointment of the PM and also the Council of Minister. Who does it? Based on Article 75(1), it is the President. The President appoints the Prime Minister and the Council of Minister. How does he appoint the PM? We have already seen it. The Council of Ministers based on the recommendation of the Prime Minister. The next is the Council of Ministers. The ministers here are the Council of Ministers. They always hold their office during the pleasure of the President. So therefore, there are two meanings here. The pleasure of the President should be understood as the pleasure of the Prime Minister. But then supposing if the statement says that the Council of Ministers hold their office during the pleasure of the Prime Minister, you should always consider the statement as wrong. It's only an inert meaning. The Constitution never says the Council of Ministers hold their office during the pleasure of the Prime Minister. It says the pleasure of the President. But the meaning is the pleasure of the Prime Minister. Why it is a pleasure of the Prime Minister? Let's say openly if a Council of Minister has a verbal spat with the Prime Minister, what the Prime Minister does, he will ask the President to remove that minister, because President is the one who is responsible for the removal of all of these Council of Ministers. So therefore, the ministers hold their office during the pleasure of the President until and unless they are in the good books of the Prime Minister. The second meaning is, when we say the Council of Ministers hold their office during the pleasure of the President, until and unless they comply to that of the constitutional obligation. Now, whenever we say complying to that of constitutional obligation, what do we mean by this? The Constitution is very clear that whomsoever has commanded the majority continues to rule, continues to command their governance for 5 years. Supposing if they lose their majority, it means that they have to pay way for some other political party to govern. So, until and unless they are upholding the Constitution, they are following the Constitution, and if they are constitutionally valid, they hold their office during the pleasure of the President. Because we had already discussed about the powers of the President, in which we had also discussed about the legislative powers, in which we also discussed about the summoning. That is, the President has every right to summon any part of the session, at any part of the time. In any year, for example, it is not necessary that it should be those 3 sessions. In fact, if there is a government which has lost its majority and then it still wants to rule, in those situations, if there is a complaint or if the President gets to know that a government has lost its majority but it's trying its level best to continue in the governance, then he has to uphold the constitutional obligation. So therefore, until and unless the Council of Ministers have the majority, they continue to hold their office during the pleasure of the President. The next one is the Council of Ministers are collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha. Why it is only Lok Sabha is because all of these ministers sink and swim together in case of Lok Sabha. They prove their majority in Lok Sabha. Point number 1. Therefore, the corollary to this is the confidence and the no confidence motion. The confidence and no confidence motion can be initiated only in the case of Lok Sabha. And that is why it's a body which is directly elected body. So these are the justification and the rationale behind why the Council of Ministers are collectively responsible only to Lok Sabha. So the other important relationship between the President and Prime Minister is given under Article 78, where there are 3 clauses to it, 3 sections to it, which the very first section is where there is a communication to the President on the administrative affairs by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, in his own wish, provides a communication to the President about the information on the most important things in India. For example, when the Galwan Valley skirmish happened between India and China, our Prime Minister provided an information to the Honorable President during that time, Well, under Article 78, we get to know about the relationship between the Prime Minister and the President under three subsections. That's Section A, Section B, and Section C, under which it becomes obligatory on the part of the President to communicate to the Prime Minister to communicate to the President about the Union administrative affairs. An example of that is when the Galwan Valley skirmish happened. That's when you saw that the President, Ramnath Kovind, was given an information by Narendra Modi about the future prospects of how the security of the nation can be strengthened. In fact, he also spoke about how the Indian Army had provided all help in order to protect the territorial integrity of this country. So this is where it's a communication provided by the Prime Minister to that of the President. The next one is to furnish the information relating to the administration of the affairs of the Union whenever the President calls to do so. So this one is a voluntary. The first 78 Section A is a voluntary. That's where the Prime Minister himself gives it. 78B is when the President seeks for it. When he seeks to furnish the information, it becomes a duty on the part of the Prime Minister to provide all information about the administrative affairs of the Union. Next, 78C is something which we do not, see it in reality. When there is an individual decision undertaken by any minister, but then it is not considered by the council, in that situation, the President can ask the council to undertake a decision. For example, let's say that there is a minister X, and this Minister X has undertaken a decision and he wants to communicate this decision to the cabinet and the council, and then nobody has provided any attention to it. In that situation, he approaches the President and presents this advice. Now the President might call the council and ask the council to consider the advice of this respective council of minister who is X here, or any cabinet minister who is X. This does not work in reality is basically because it results in a friction between a minister to the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister might think that the minister is trying to complain against him to that of the President, which also results in some kind of a friction between the Prime Minister and also the President as well. So therefore, in reality, we do not see it as, because any minister will try to sort out his difference within the four walls of the cabinet. Supposing if he is unhappy about it, it's always better that he resigns from the office. Otherwise, the Prime Minister will always ask the President to remove him from the office. So he will lose the power and position of the minister. It might be the Council of Minister or a Cabinet Minister or a Deputy Minister for that matter. Let's move ahead with this. So what about the Council of Ministers? Who are they, right? The Council of Minister has three important hierarchy. They are the Cabinet Ministers, the Ministers of State, and the Deputy Minister. Who are these Cabinet Ministers? Cabinet Ministers are those ministers who attend the Cabinet meeting regularly. So they attend the Cabinet meeting regularly, and these are those ministers who hold the influential portfolios, which are hefty portfolios, and they are responsible for the most important decision making in this country. And they meet regularly. They attend the cabinet meeting regularly. Well, the second part of them are called as Minister of State. Again, there are two hierarchies here. One is the independent charge, and the other one is called as under the cabinet minister. Well, the cabinet minister will have a load of many departments. Maybe one or two departments would be given to this Minister of State who is working under the cabinet minister. While on the other end, the Minister of State who hold the cabinet, independent charge, he will attend the cabinet meeting. But then it is only those cabinet meetings which will be called by the Prime Minister. He will not attend all cabinet meetings. But in the case of Minister of State under a cabinet minister, he will never attend any cabinet meeting at all. He will be in charge of one or two departments which will be handled by the cabinet minister, and his functions and his responsibilities, all of that would be decided by the cabinet minister. The next one is a deputy minister. This is like a grooming post. A person who is like a first-time MP and he has a potentiality to become a cabinet minister, or probably he might be a prime minister one day, he can be groomed in a post so that he can understand the administrative machineries and also the rules and the rules of governing as a minister. So therefore, he'll start his position as a deputy minister. And over a period of years, he can become a minister of state and then a cabinet minister. Most of the politicians of the yesteryears, including one of the former the president of India, that's Pranab Mukherjee, started his career as a deputy minister, and he becomes minister of state and also the cabinet minister. He becomes cabinet minister during the tenure of Indira Gandhi. And it's history that he went on to become, you know, a cabinet minister even during Dr. Manmohan Singh's tenure, and then he becomes the president of India. And when he was a president, he was, you know, that was where he could see the prime minister once from the UPA side and once also from the NDA side, and that's Narendra Modi. So you will see all of these three in a hierarchy. That's cabinet minister, minister of state and deputy minister. These three hierarchy put together is council of ministers. The council of minister is one which is seen in the constitution of India, but then we will not see the term called as cabinet ministers, ministers of state or deputy minister. However, the term called as cabinet is only present in article 352 of the Indian constitution. So, well, let's try to understand the other things about them. So, what are the constitutional provisions which we see in case of the Council of Ministers, which we have already seen? Well, related to it, the very first one is, of course, the Council of Ministers are headed by the PM to aid and advise the President. So, this is one important article which we have already studied, and we have already learned that the relationship between the Prime Minister and the President is completely dependent on this. And of course, 75(1) speaks about their appointment. And according to the 91st Constitutional Amendment Act, which was put in 2003, the total strength of Council of Ministers shall not exceed 15% strength of Lok Sabha. So this is what we need to understand. The 91st Constitutional Amendment Act is very clear on this. And the Council of Ministers hold their office during the pleasure of the President. We had already discussed about it. Then they are also collectively responsible to that of Lok Sabha. Well, one of the other important thing is every minister has a right to speak and take part in any proceeding, even though he is not a member of the other house. However, whenever there is a question of voting, he can only vote in only that house in which he is a member of. So I repeat this point. Supposing, now let's take an example of Narendra Modi, who is the Prime Minister right now. Narendra Modi, being a member of Lok Sabha, he can participate in debate and also vote for any debates in case of, and also motion of thanks of anything. He can do an voting in the case of Lok Sabha. But in case of Rajya Sabha, he can only participate in debates and all proceedings, but he does not have the right to vote in the case of Rajya Sabha because he is not the member of Rajya Sabha. He is a member of Lok Sabha. So this is what it is. Let's take an example of Finance Minister itself. Finance Minister is a member of Rajya Sabha but not Lok Sabha. But then many a times you would see finance minister speaking inside the parliament. If at all, if there is anything associated with budget, that's when the finance minister is responsible to speak anything about the budget in the Lok Sabha. Especially the finance bill. Related to the finance bill, it's the finance minister who is responsible for introducing the finance bill in the case of Lok Sabha, because finance bills should always be introduced in Lok Sabha first, right? Unlike the case of financial bills, where you will have three different clauses, especially two clauses there. That is 117 subclause 1, 117 subclause 3. We'll discuss about it a bit later after we discuss about all of this. Well, that's about the Council of Ministers constitutional provisions. So what are the responsibilities which they have? Which are the responsibilities? The very first is their individual responsibility. What is that individual responsibility? They're individually responsible to their ministries, respective ministries and departments. And also as a minister, they're responsible to make rules with respect to smooth discharge of functions and smooth functioning of their ministry and a department. Right? And that's where we always see this as smooth conduction of business with respect to their ministries and department. The next one is collective responsibility. Now we always have this phrase called as sink and swim together. So the entire Council of Ministers are collectively responsible to Lok Sabha. They should sink and swim together. There should not be any question as such where there is a collective responsibility where one is saying one thing and the other is completely contradicting the other. right? So they are collectively responsible irrespective of the differences what they have. The third one is a moral responsibility. Moral responsibility is something where a minister takes a moral responsibility and tries to, take an action against certain things. For example, if there is a havoc, or if at all if there is an accident, in those cases what the ministers do, the Council of Ministers do, especially the cabinet minister, they take the moral responsibility and they submit the resignation to the Prime Minister. This has happened in the past also, where especially related to the railway accidents, where some of the ministers resigned after the railway accident, taking the moral responsibility. A home minister resigned after a terrorist attack. So these are some examples to understand about the moral responsibilities. But then we normally see that some of the ministers, or most of them, lacking this moral responsibility. I think this is not mentioned in the Constitution, but then we are just speaking about the different responsibilities of the Council of Ministers. One thing which is a change from that of the British responsibility is the legal responsibility. In fact, in case of Great Britain, United Kingdom, in case of United Kingdom, the ministers, the Council of Ministers also has something called as legal responsibility, which the Indian ministers do not have. What is that legal responsibility? Supposing if any minister has promised and he has given a complete policy about this, and if he fails to deliver that policy, then any citizen of that country, that is any citizen of United Kingdom, can sue him. Unfortunately, this kind of provision is not allowed in the Indian Constitution. Neither we see it in the Indian administrative governance or Indian administrative machinery. So the legal responsibility is completely absent, while the legal responsibility of the ministers are present in the case of United Kingdom. This is about the responsibility of Council of Ministers. Let's move to the next topic, and that's where the difference between the cabinet minister and the Council of Ministers. Of course, the cabinet meeting. So about the cabinet minister, they attend the cabinet meeting. These people do not attend the cabinet meeting at all. So they meet regularly, they do not meet regularly. While cabinet ministers are those who hold influential portfolios like that of defense, home, external affairs, finance, large-scale enterprises, agriculture, etc. While these people are responsible to help the cabinet minister to discharge their function. So it is the entire gamut of minister of cabinet minister, ministers of state, and also deputy ministers. So the collective body is called as Council of Ministers. The Constitution of India mentions only about the Council of Ministers, but then it does not mention anything about the cabinet minister. This you have to keep it in mind. Well, apart from that, it directly is responsible for, it directs the Council of Ministers to make certain policies. Now, what sort of policies are we talking about? Now, these are those policies which helps in the administration. We are talking about the public policy. While in the case of the Council of Ministers, they will assist the cabinet minister in implementing the decision. So we are talking about the other ministers, especially the ministers of state and also the deputy minister, assisting the cabinet ministers in order to make a public policy, assisting them in making the public policy. Well, apart from this, there are two things which we normally read it in newspapers, constantly in news. The first one is cabinet committees, the other one is group of ministers. Well, there are a lot of cases which were in news related to group of ministers and also cabinet committees in 2023 and also in the initial part of 2024, especially in Jan and Feb. We could see about n number of cabinet committees which were in news, especially appointments committee was in news, and also the group of minister was constituted for certain important things. Well, cabinet committees and group of ministers do not have any place in the Constitution. This is point number one. This is only the governance aspect. So therefore, it is being used to accentuate the efficiency in governance, right? So what are these cabinet committees? Cabinet committees are arm of the cabinet. Now, what is this arm of the cabinet? Amongst the cabinet ministers, what they do is they start making a group, like 4 or 5 or something. Right? For example, there is a committee called as Political Affairs Committee. The Political Affairs Committee comprises of the Prime Minister has the head, and you will also have, the Home Minister, you will have the Finance Minister, you have the External Affairs Minister, you have the Defense Minister. So all of them put together becomes the Political Affairs Committee, and it is considered to be the super cabinet. So what happens before they discuss certain issues in hand before the cabinet, what they do is they will prepare for it well in advance. Only these 4 or 5 ministers under the leadership of the Prime Minister, they'll discuss about all of this, 4 ministers, the 4 important portfolios, and then they would put forward these inputs before the cabinet. That's where, the cabinet committees can accentuate the decision making. They can always help in speedy decision making. Well, related to group of minister, this is for certain specific issues. It might be an issue on some kind of a riot in India. It can be an issue on inflation. It can be an issue of some kind of developmental activity. So in these kind of things, a group of ministers shall be constituted, and these group of ministers will always bring in their inputs, and they'll make sure that they take a decision in order to eliminate those kind of red tapeism, or if it is in case of certain policies which is not impacting the society and so on. So the group of ministers, cabinet committees will always accentuate the efficiency in governance. That's why this is always called as the extra constitutional bodies, since they are not present in the constitution. The Constitution of India does not have any specific, provisions for cabinet committees or the group of ministers. Related to cabinet committee, you will also have the Parliamentary Affairs Committee, which is the only committee which is chaired by the Home Minister. Apart from that, all cabinet committees would be chaired by the Prime Minister. Basically, most of these cabinet ministers do not have time. In order to save time and in order to make sure that there is speedy decision making, cabinet committees are constituted. And in some cases, if there is some controversy or some kind of an exigency, it might be on a calamity, or it might be some kind of an accident, a group of ministers are constituted in order to have better view of a bird eye view of those kind of topics, and also to have a broader perspective and to provide a decision making related to it. So this is why we have cabinet committees and also group of ministers. So let's move ahead with the next topic. Well, the next topic is the Parliament, and you all know about Article 79, which very clearly states that Parliament comprises of Rajya Sabha, Lok Sabha and the President. So you should always understand that the President is an integral part of the Parliament. So the upper house is called as Rajya Sabha, and the relic of bicameralism, we have already discussed about this. This is given in the Government of India Act of 1919. In the previous session, I had already told you that the Government of India Act of 1919 provided for a bicameral legislature in India, and out of which it also said that it presents 2 houses. So there will be existence of 2 houses, that's the upper house and the lower house. Both houses will have equal powers except the power of the purse, and the power of the purse is always with that of the lower house. Now what is this power of the purse? The power of the purse is nothing but then the money powers. That's about the financial power. Okay, so talking about Rajya Sabha, why a Rajya Sabha? Basically, Rajya Sabha is called as Council of States. Now, Rajya Sabha provides a platform for all of these states to discuss their problems in the national platform, national arena. So that's the reason why Council of States. And we do not have equal representation unlike that of the United States of America. And you should know that I had already told you when we were discussing over the Federation that in the case of United States of America, they have equal representation amongst all of the states in the case of their upper house. But unlike them, we do not have equal representation. We have unequal distribution of it, dependent on the population and dependent on a lot of other criteria as well. So the composition of Rajya Sabha, it's maximum of 250, while the present strength is 245, out of which 233 is elected and 12 is nominated. And we had also discussed about who are these 12 nominated. They are from literature, science, arts and social service. Well, Rajya Sabha is a permanent body. You cannot dissolve Rajya Sabha. It's only the Lok Sabha which gets dissolved, which is nothing but the lower house. And Rajya Sabha is indirectly elected. The moment we say indirectly elected, we do not participate in the election of Rajya Sabha. So how and who are those people who are responsible for voting for Rajya Sabha MPs? It is the MLAs of the concerned state legislative assemblies. For example, whenever there is a vacancy For instance, let's take an example of Madhya Pradesh. Madhya Pradesh, if it has a vacancy of 4 people, if 4 people are retired from Madhya Pradesh, then it so happens that the MLAs in the state legislature assemblies of Madhya Pradesh, they will vote for the candidates who stand for these 4 constituencies. I mean, the 4 seats in case of Rajya Sabha. So that is why it is an indirectly elected body. We do not participate in it. And then the tenure of these people is 6 years. Unlike Lok Sabha, which is 5 years, they have 6 years. And 1/3 of them retire every 2 years. So 1/3 is retiring every 2 years. So out of the strength of 233, 1/3 of them has to retire. The system is made in such a way that 1/3 vacancy is always created every 2 years. Now, how it was done after 1952? From 1952 it was done. Now, how it was done is interesting. So initially when the election did happen, now all of them got elected. So it was 233 posts which got elected, 233 seats which got elected. And after 1954, 1/3 of them had to retire is basically because lottery was used. Using lottery, 1/3 of them were asked to retire. So these people were unlucky because they got only 2 years. Then the remaining 2/3 continue for the 4th year. So in 1956, for the remaining 2/3 again, so 1/3 vacancy was created on these people. Out of this 1/3, a vacancy is created after 2 years, and then there is an election and they get elected. Once they get elected, again they get 6 years here. That 1/3 has already got 6 years, 6 years of tenure. So the remaining 2/3 who went to 1956, out of that, again for 1/3, lottery was taken, and out of this, 1/3 had to retire here again. So here also 1/3 had to retire. After that, the remaining 1/3 completed their tenure in 1958. So they completed their 6 years of tenure. From 1958, it was as normal in the case of Rajya Sabha. So this is how the procedure of the process of election was used in the case of Rajya Sabha. Let's talk about the qualification to become a Rajya Sabha member. What are the qualification? The very first qualification is he shall be a citizen of India. This is, the different class of citizenship is not mentioned by the Constitution of India. It can be by citizenship by birth or descent or registration or acquisition of territory, also naturalization. And you should have attained 30 years of age. And why it's 30 years of age? It's senior compared to that of Lok Sabha. That's the reason, 30 years of age. You shall not hold any office of profit. So what is office of profit? You are not supposed to hold 2 government positions at a time. We have already discussed about it. And you should not use your office for profitable means, for private means. So that is what it is when we speak what? No office of profit. Any other qualification which is as mentioned by the Parliament of India. So any other qualification which is as mentioned in the Parliament of India, so that is also applicable to them. So these are the important qualifications to become a Rajya Sabha member. Next, what are the special powers with respect to Rajya Sabha? These are the only 3 special powers what you have got with respect to Rajya Sabha. The very first one is extremely important, where it's the power of the Parliament to make the law on the state list in the wake of national importance. Now, why this is an exclusive power of Rajya Sabha? Because if the bill is not introduced in Rajya Sabha, then the bill becomes void. Well, if any bill which seeks to make law on the state list, and this is where the central government is more powerful, the center is more powerful than that of the state. And that's why we also said that it is a Canadian model of federation. So, normally in case of federation, it is based on the division of power. So the central government gets its own share of subjects on which it makes the law. The state government gets its own share of subjects where it can make a law. So that's where there's a clear division. However, in this case, it so happens that since it's a Canadian model, and the states might result in some kind of a problem or some kind of a regionalism, is because we are a multi-pluralistic society. So therefore, the constitution makers borrow this Canadian model of federation, under which, under certain circumstances, in the wake of national importance, the Parliament has the power to make law on the state list. Well, if the Parliament has to make a law on the state list, the bill has to be first introduced in the case of Rajya Sabha. All right. The next one is Article 67, which is related to the impeachment of the Vice President. Related to the impeachment of Vice President, you should always understand that the Vice President, who is the chairman of Rajya Sabha, he can be impeached based on a resolution which is initiated from Rajya Sabha only. And it can be agreed by the Lok Sabha. Agreed by the Lok Sabha is just by passing through a vote, a simple majority. However, the bill of that sort has to be introduced only from Rajya Sabha. The resolution has to be initiated only from Rajya Sabha. The next one is creation of new All India service. This is also one of the important special power, and this bill has to be introduced only from Rajya Sabha, not from Lok Sabha. So any bill to create a new All India service, as you all know that we have only 3 All India service, and they are, the first one is the IAS, Indian Administrative Service, Indian Police Service, and Indian Forest Service. Well, if there is any new All India service which the government needs to create that, then it has to introduce a bill starting from Rajya Sabha only. So these are the 3 special powers which the Rajya Sabha has. Apart from that, it has equal powers with that of Lok Sabha, except the money powers. So it is related to money bill and the financial powers. Okay. So this is what we need to understand. Okay. So let's go ahead with the next topic, and the next topic is Lok Sabha. And you all know that the Lok Sabha is the lower house. We call this as lower house. And this is a directly elected body. And with respect to the composition, the maximum strength in the case of Lok Sabha is 550. Earlier it was 552, is because the 2 was the nomination of Anglo-Indian communities. Now the Parliament has done away with this, so therefore we have 550 as the maximum strength, out of which the present strength is 543. Well, the tenure of Lok Sabha is 5 years, as you all know. Now, what are the qualifications to become a Lok Sabha member? First and foremost, he shall be a citizen of this country. He should have attained 25 years of age. Now, what's the minimum age to stand for an election in India? It's not 25, it's 21. Where do we find this 21? In the local bodies. It is in the case of local bodies. Both in the case of urban local body as well as the rural local body. And of course, similar to that of Rajya Sabha, he shall not hold any office of profit, and any other law which is as applicable in the case of the Parliament. So this is what we see in the case of Lok Sabha. Let's see about its powers. The very first power is money bill. Now, what is a money bill? We are going to discuss about it. Money bill, financial bill, and all of it. Money bill can be introduced only in the Lok Sabha. Well, money bill is given in detail in Article 110 of the Indian Constitution. What comprises of money bill? Anything which deals with money, anything which is a receipt which goes from the public account of India, anything which is an expenditure, anything which is a taxation which is charged on the consolidated fund of India, or any receipts which is taken from appropriation of money which is taken from the contingency fund of India. That is A to G provision, and the money bill in itself as a provision which is given under Article 110 of the Indian Constitution. So, well, what is a money bill? Anything which is certified by the Speaker as a money bill is a money bill. Any bill which requires a certification of the Speaker. Without the certification of the Speaker, the money bill cannot travel to that of Rajya Sabha. Of course, the money bill is introduced only in the case of Lok Sabha. Example of money bill is the budget. Right, the annual financial statement. The second one is a financial bill. So you should understand that there is a difference between money bill, financial bill, and finance bill. All of these 3 are different, and there are synonymous amongst these 3. So we'll try to discuss about them. The financial bill of class 1, so that's on Article 117 subclause 1, can be introduced only in the case of Lok Sabha. Well, about financial bill, we will also discuss the difference between these 2 a bit later, and then we will also try to understand the concepts. Okay, what is no confidence motion? No confidence motion is something which can be initiated by the opposition political party. Now, there is no reason for opposition political party to initiate this no confidence motion. But then what is the impact of this? Once the no confidence motion is initiated, then the entire government has to prove its majority. Well, the ruling party has to prove its majority. So that's how it is. So it means that, for some reason, the opposition feels that the government, they do not have any faith in the government, or they feel that the government is becoming corrupt, or they are not giving proper transparency and accountability in the system. So, but then there is no reason to apply this no confidence motion. However, once it is initiated, it cannot be initiated in the next 6 months. So who initiates a no confidence motion? It is always the opposition political parties which initiates the no confidence motion. While on the other end, you have the confidence motion. So who initiates the confidence motion? It is always the ruling party. Now the next question is, why is that the ruling party is initiating it and then proving its own majority? It is a show of strength against the opposition. If they feel that the opposition is trying to disrupt the session, or in order to ridicule the opposition, or in order to make sure that they are the complete majority over that of the minority in the opposition, in those cases, you can see that the confidence motion can be initiated. Once a confidence motion is initiated, it cannot be initiated in the next 6 months. The difference between these two is, this is an initiation of, no confidence motion is an initiation of opposition political party, while the confidence motion is an initiation of, or an initiative of, ruling party. We had already discussed about Article 75 subclause 3. And what did it say? It very clearly said that the Council of Ministers are collectively responsible to Lok Sabha. And the corollary to that is no confidence motion and confidence motion. I had told you during that time itself. So the reason why no confidence motion and the confidence motion is initiated only in Lok Sabha is because the minister's collective responsibility is seen in Lok Sabha. The ruling party commands its majority in Lok Sabha, and the government is from the ruling party, and that's in the parliament. So that's the reason behind it. And apart from that, the adjournment motion is also initiated in the case of Lok Sabha. So what do you mean by adjournment motion? Adjournment motion is to ask the parliament to discuss about the matters of urgent public importance. Of course, whenever this is done, it requires a strength of minimum 50 people. However, it can be done in any part of the session. Adjournment motion has an impact to discuss matters of urgent public importance. It's important to understand that this is on urgent public importance. So the parliamentarians have got to know that something has happened, and they want to attract the government's attention. So what do? They initiate an adjournment motion. Of course, apart from that, what is one of the most important special power in the Lok Sabha is the strength of the speaker, the power of the speaker. Well, speaker, being the head of Lok Sabha, he commands the most important initiation of maintaining the decorum of the speaker of the Lok Sabha. Apart from that, the Lok Sabha has more strength compared to that of Rajya Sabha. So, well, the power of the speaker is very clearly seen is basically because he becomes the head of the Indian parliamentarian group. So the head or the chairperson of the Indian parliamentarian group is always a speaker, and he has a role in the case of disqualification. Apart from that, he has his role in the case of money bill. That's very, very important. That's in the case of certification of the money bill. So these are the special powers of Lok Sabha. Apart from that, they will have equal powers as that of Rajya Sabha, that is in the case of impeachment of the president, in the case of election of the president, in case of election of the other important constitutional authorities, impeachment of other important constitutional authorities. Both of these bodies will have equal power. Both of these houses will have equal powers, including the constitutional amendment bill. All right. So let's move ahead with the next topic. Now let's speak about the disqualification. This is again a current affairs topic. So here what we should know is section 8 subclause 4 in case of Representation of People Act or People's Representation Act, RPA 1951. What does it say? That now this has to be followed with that of the RPA, that is Representation of People Act of 1951. Subclause 8, section 8 subclause 4 is currently in use is basically because if any MP or an MLA or an MLC is convicted, and where the conviction attracts a minimum imprisonment of more than 2 years, then he faces disqualification, which is immediate. Now, this immediate disqualification also rules him out from contesting election from the next 6 years. So, for the next 6 years plus 2 years, where he has to finish his imprisonment, for totally 8 years, he cannot stand for the election. He cannot contest for the election. Let it be a member of parliament or member of state legislature assembly or the member of the state legislature council, MLC. Well, here, what is a case which we need to remember? That's the 2013 Lily Thomas versus Union of India. Earlier, what used to happen was, before this, if an MP was convicted or an MLA was convicted or an MLC was convicted, he can appeal against it. So, the moment he appeals against it, you know, there was a 3 months of leeway which was provided according to the Section 8, Subclause 4 of the People's Representation Act, which said that within 3 months he has to appeal. The fact that if he appeals is more than enough that he can stay away from disqualification. However, this was challenged in the Lily Thomas versus the Union of India, under which the Honorable Supreme Court has called this as ultra-virus, and it said that if an MP is convicted, then it amounts to an immediate disqualification. So this has resulted in a lot of controversies, you know, in fact, the opposition party blaming the ruling blaming the opposition, and so on and so forth. But then, in terms of democracy, this is quite required. And Lily Thomas versus Union of India, with the help of Supreme Court, the Honorable Supreme Court is right. In fact, you know, to make sure that anybody who has a criminal antecedent and who is convicted in the court of law, he does not have any moral right to continue in his office, which is very, very clear. So I think this is what is required for the examination. So please do keep this in mind, because this was in news and still it is in news, is because there is an MP who is on a run, and it's related to a sexual assault case. And so there is a lot of you know, political turmoil which is going on, and constitutional experts are saying what happens once he comes back after the election, what if he wins the election, and so on and so forth. However, I cannot discuss the pros and cons and everything in detail, is basically because this is not the time. We have to discuss other aspects of Indian polity, because I'm covering the entire thing of rapid revision. So therefore, let's move ahead with the other important topic. Of course, on what areas he can be disqualified, on what criteria he can be disqualified. Supposing on office of profit. So he shall not have any office of profit. If he is of unsound mind or a body, meaning if he has gone nuts, basically in that case, the parliament can disqualify. I mean, it amounts to disqualification. Who has the authority for disqualification? It's the Speaker of the House, that's in Lok Sabha, and also the Chairman of Rajya Sabha. So they have the authority of disqualification. Well, if he is of undischarged insolvent, in other words, if he has become bankrupt, and that's laughable, is because we say MP being bankrupt, that can never happen, I believe. Next, voluntary acquired citizenship of some other country, it amounts to termination. It also amounts to that of deprivation of citizenship. Of course, this amounts to disqualification, because he is a lawmaker, and if he has acquired citizenship of another country, it means that he becomes a citizen of another country. So therefore, it amounts to disqualification, or he is disqualified by any other law of the parliament. So this is given under Article 102, disqualification of an MP. So disqualified under any law of the parliament, that's where Section 8, Subclause 4 is to be seen. Does Election Commission of India has any hand in this, you know, to reduce the disqualification? It's the Section 11 of the People's Representation Act, the Representation of People Act of 1951, is quite interesting. It can reduce, or it can provide a leeway or an exemption to a serving MLA or an MLC or an MP to contest in an election. So the Election Commission of India can reduce the tenure of conviction, or also, you know, reduce the tenure of conviction. It can provide an exemption to make sure that the MP or an MLA or an MLC can still contest in the election. So this is what the section 11 of Representation of People's Act do say about it. Well, but then section 8 subclause 4 is in news, so please do know about it. Okay, so let's move ahead with the next topic. So who are the officers in the case of the parliament? The very first officer is the speaker, and there is a difference between speaker and the pro tem speaker. Pro tem speaker, as the name itself suggests, is a speaker temporary. So he's a temporary speaker. So this pro tem speaker helps in the appointment of the election of the speaker. It's not appointment, the speaker is always elected, and he'll also help in affirmation of oath of office to all of these newly elected Lok Sabha, especially the newly elected members of parliament. So that's where we find the pro tem speaker. Of course, talking about the speaker is always elected from Lok Sabha amongst all the elected members of the House, and he is also removed from the Lok Sabha. It is through a simple majority. He is removed from the Lok Sabha. And then if he has to resign from his office, he will always address his resignation to that of the Deputy Speaker. In the absence of the Speaker, the Deputy Speaker would preside over the office. Now, what are the functions of the Speaker? First and foremost, he is responsible for maintenance of decorum in the House of Lok Sabha, where nobody can question on the decorum, which is a rule, which can be a rule which can be passed by the speaker. So he can pass any rule for the maintenance of decorum in the house. He can frame rules for the smooth conduction of business in the house. Any rules within the Lok Sabha can be made by the speaker in himself, and of course there is one committee which will always assist him in making the rules, and that's called as Business Advisory Committee. Well, apart from that, he presides over the joint sitting. And who calls for the joint sitting? The president calls for the joint sitting. Who presides over the joint sitting? It is a speaker. In the absence of the speaker, it is a deputy speaker. In the absence of deputy speaker, it is a deputy chairman. So please do understand, it goes in an order. Who calls for a joint sitting? The president calls for a joint sitting, supposing if there is any conflict between two houses over a bill, right? Where the one house has passed the bill, where the other house is not. So supposing if there is any deadlock over a bill, and the president called for the joint sitting in order to overcome this kind of a deadlock, speaker will always preside over it. In the absence of speaker, it is a deputy speaker. In the absence of speaker and the deputy speaker, it is a deputy chairman, because he is elected in the House of Rajya Sabha. In the absence of all of these three, any other senior most chamber, any other senior most member amongst the chamber of house can preside over a meeting as decided by the president. And he is also head of the Indian Parliamentary Group. As I mentioned, being the head of the Indian Parliamentary Group, he has more functionality compared to that of the chairman of Rajya Sabha. And he is the one who is responsible for deciding any bill to become a money bill. He certifies the money bill as well. And all disqualifications with respect to Lok Sabha is done by the speaker. So, and that is what we have already discussed with respect to disqualification of any member of parliament, especially a Lok Sabha member. All right. So let's move to the next topic. All right, let's go to the next important officer, and the next important officer is the Vice President, who is also the ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha. And in the table of precedence, we normally see he is next only to the President. So whenever we speak about the President here, the President acts as the first table of precedence, and of course the second table of precedence is always the Vice President. Now, why this ex officio chairman here? Ex officio is by the virtue of his power. Since the Vice President is not designated with any other function, he is just a substitute to that of the President. It's wrong to call that a substitute. However, the Vice President acts as a President in those circumstances when the President is not available. So therefore, by the virtue of his power, he is a chairman of Rajya Sabha. So therefore, the Constitution makers has given this kind of an obligation to that of the Vice President. How is he elected? He is elected through the simple majority by both the Houses of Parliament. Please do understand here the nominated members do also participate in the election of the vice president, because there is no proportional representation system. While since in the case of the president, the election of the president has the proportional representation system, therefore, in that case, the nominated members do not participate. Since here, there is no question of proportional representation system, therefore, the nominated members do participate in the election of the president, election of the vice president. Please do understand the constitution has a logic. We have to understand the logic instead of by-hearting it, instead of memorizing it. If you understand the logic, you can answer any question under the polity questions section, and also you can also answer any question under the constitution. So basically you should know what's the logic behind each and every article, what is the logic behind each and every statement of the article or the subsection of the law. Well, how is he removed? How is the vice president removed? The vice president removal is initiated by the Rajya Sabha. This we have already discussed under Article 67, which becomes the special power, and of course agreed by Lok Sabha. So it can be an oral agreement as well. And he has similar powers as that of the Lok Sabha speaker. What is that similar power we are discussing here? So it is related to disqualification. Disqualification of any member of the parliament from Rajya Sabha, especially 10th schedule of the Indian constitution. Now we also have to see that in the case of Lok Sabha, please do make this applicable in the case of Lok Sabha speaker as well. Because when we were discussing about the Lok Sabha speaker, I did not speak about the anti-defection law and the 10th schedule, the disqualification of any member of parliament. So we had only discussed about the section 8 subclause 4 about the disqualification of an MP, MLA and also an MLC, but we did not discuss about the disqualification under the anti-defection law. So 10th schedule is related to anti-defection law, and anything which is a disqualification, it would be the prerogative of the speaker related to it. And also in the House of the Parliament, under Article 102, the disqualification, the power of disqualification is vested with that of the chairman of Rajya Sabha, especially in case of Rajya Sabha members. Well, moving ahead, what are the important parliamentary proceedings? The first one is called as adjournment. What do you mean by adjournment? The House is adjourned for so and so a time, right? So adjournment means a temporary recession. Sorry, it's a recess. It's not recession. It's a temporary recess period which is given in the House of the Parliament. The House is adjourned. Why the House is adjourned? Maybe it's because the opposition political parties are disrupting the session. So therefore, the House can be adjourned. So it's a temporary recess period which is provided to them. All right. So this is what we need to understand. Okay. Well, what is adjournment sine die? In case of adjournment, the speaker or the chairman says that the House is adjourned for such and such a date or a time. While in the adjournment sine die, the date and the time is not mentioned. So therefore, normally in case of prorogation, what is proroguing? Proroguing is a break which is provided from one session to the other. That is, for example, the end of a session, the time from the end of the session, that's in the case of a monsoon session to the winter session, the starting of the winter session. The break what we see, that we call it as prorogue. Right? Prorogation is a temporary end to a session. It calls that officially a session has ended. The entire session is ended. Now, before, after the prorogue has to be called, before that, it shall be adjournment sine die. Adjournment sine die is normally done by the speaker or the chairman of Rajya Sabha, where they normally say that the House is adjourned for some date or a time. They will not mention the date or a time. They say that the House is only adjourned, post which the president calls for a prorogation. But then in reality, the president never calls for a prorogation. So that's what we need to understand. But he has the power of proroguing the House of Parliament. So that's what it is. Dissolution. Now, what is dissolution? Dissolution is applicable only in the case of Lok Sabha. It's not applicable in the case of Rajya Sabha. So there are certain devices which we need to understand, right? Which are these devices? The very first device is nothing but these type of questions, the question asks. So the next topic is about the devices of the Parliament, and out of which we have the question hour, we have the 0 hour, we have the privilege motion, we have the calling attention motion, adjournment motion, no confidence motion. Confidence motion was already discussed. These three were already discussed in the special powers of Lok Sabha. and we need to discuss about the censure motion. See, adjournment motion is a special power of Lok Sabha, but in Rajya Sabha, to discuss matters of urgent public importance similar to that of adjournment motion is called as motion of papers. Motion of papers are to discuss matters of urgent public importance in the case of Rajya Sabha. So let's try to discuss about the question hour. Now, why a question hour? Question hour is normally to ask a question to a minister or any member of parliament. Why I'm saying about any member of parliament? Because in the case of question hour, a question can be targeted to any private member of the parliament as well. Many people do not know about this. It can be targeted to a private member of the parliament. And why it is targeted about the private member of the parliament is because it's related to some kind of a bill. If the resolution related to the bill is not proper, or if there is any explanation to seek from this private member related to any bill which he or she has initiated, then in that case, a question hour or a question can be posed to any private member. Well, so this is normally to a minister. Why it is normally to a minister? To seek accountability and transparency. So the very first one is called a start question. As the name itself suggests, it is with an asterisk symbol, and this is like an oral question, so therefore an oral answer which is given by a minister. And of course, this can be followed by a supplementary question because this is a oral question. So there is a oral question, there is a oral answer followed by a supplementary question where the minister need to answer. Unstart question, as the name itself suggests, it's a written question, so therefore it has to be followed by a written explanation. Right. So in some cases, a notice has to be given to this. It might be a notice of 15 days or 20 days or something like that. And that is why it is called as an unstart question. So it's a written question, a written answer. So therefore, there is no supplementary question, which you see it in case of unstart question. The next one is called as a short notice question. As the name itself suggests, it is of a short notice, which is of 10 days. So it's a written question. So therefore, it is a written answer. So the supplementary question will not follow. Since it is on a short notice, so that is why it is called as a short notice question, because it is of 10 days. It is given for a 10 days. What is 0 hour? 0 hour is to discuss matters of urgent public importance. And this happens every single day whenever there is a session in the parliament, exactly at 12 o'clock. So this is the only invention of the Indian parliament. So the one which follows the question hour is always the 0 hour. Probably this is one of the most important or the only invention of the Indian parliament. Indians are known to invent zeros. And we have also invented the same in the case of our parliament to discuss matters of urgent public importance. The next one is called as the privilege motion. Now, in case of 0 hour, anybody, especially the opposition political parties, will want to discuss matters of urgent public importance which has happened on every day. This happens on an everyday basis. Right, it might be on yesterday some issue has happened, so they want to discuss about it. So they'll take up that matter. Well, it is not necessary that it will happen at every moment of a time. If it is at every moment of a time, then you have an adjournment motion. Adjournment motion discusses the same thing. So adjournment motion has the same intention. It is to discuss matters of urgent public importance. The only thing is, adjournment motion can happen at any moment of a time inside the session of the parliament, while this 0 hour will happen exactly at 12 o'clock, and it happens every single day in the case of the sessions of the parliament. Well, the next one is the privilege motion. So what do you mean by privilege motion? You have to understand that the members of parliament enjoy certain privileges. Okay. The breach of privilege is where some members of parliament question them. So that's where the privilege motion is initiated. Now, supposing if any minister as a member of parliament has misused the privileges and immunities given to him or her, or if he has tried to, misuse his office, and then if he has given false information to the parliament, this attracts a privilege motion which can be initiated by any member of parliament. Now, is it only by any member of parliament on a minister? Can a minister do it on any member of parliament? That also can happen. So this is basically for any member of parliament who has breached the privilege of the house. An example of this, what you can see here, one of the famous example is in the Indira Gandhi's case. In 1978, because she misused her office in 1975, a group of ministers, the then Home Minister from the Janata Party in 1978 had initiated a privilege motion against Mrs. Gandhi. And post which the House took a decision to expel her from the House of Lok Sabha. So, well, this is where there is an effect of privilege motion. So, what is an understanding here? The first level of understanding is anybody who has, misused the privileges given by the House of Parliament. It can be any privilege or any immunity provided by the House of the Parliament. It attracts. Now, if they have misused, it attracts a punishment. Right? Who is the first level of authority for the admissibility of this motion? It will be the Speaker in the case of Lok Sabha, or it will be the Chairman in the case of Rajya Sabha. So, this is point number one, what you need to understand. Point number two is, related to privilege motion, there cannot be an immediate decision. What these people can do is, the presiding officers can do is, the presiding officers can constitute a committee. They can constitute a committee of 15 in the case of Lok Sabha. Well, in the case of Rajya Sabha, the chairman can constitute a member of 10, nominate a member of 10. So these two committees will look into the breach of privileges done by the respective member of parliament in the House. And after that, a report would be sought within a stipulated time period. Now, after this, after the report is submitted to the chairman of Rajya Sabha and the speaker of Lok Sabha respectively, whichever house it is, then the speaker or the chairman will summon the respective member of parliament on which the privilege motion is initiated. And this person on which the privilege motion is initiated shall provide an explanation, can justify his or her action. Post which, depending on the report, the speaker or the chairman of Rajya Sabha shall decide whether they shall take an action against them or not. So this is a detailed procedure in which the privilege motion shall be initiated and then the consequences of initiating a privilege motion. So it has happened a couple of times recently. You see this a privilege motion which happened on Rahul Gandhi by Smriti Irani, because Rahul Gandhi did this on Smriti Irani, who was a minister. And then Smriti Irani countered by, initiating a privilege motion against him. So, well, every privilege motion is dependent. The first level of authority is always the chairman or the speaker. So, if they do not provide an opportunity of admissibility of privilege motion, then it fails. If they do not take a disciplinary action against this fails. If they do not go forward in constituting a committee, again it fails. Okay. So, the next one is calling attention motion. So what do you mean by calling attention motion? Again, this is to discuss matters of urgent public importance. However, the corresponding member of parliament has sought the respective ministers or the minister related to these matters of urgent public importance to provide an immediate relief to it. So basically, calling attention motion is seeking a redressal by a respective ministry, that is a minister, to take an action on the matters of urgent public importance. Again, so calling attention motion, 0R, adjournment motion is related to matters of urgent public importance, while 0R is at 12 o'clock. It can be initiated by any member of parliament. Adjournment motion is on any point of a session in the parliament, while calling attention motion is attracting the attention of a minister and his response on the matters of urgent public importance. So this is where it is. So since we have discussed about these three, I'm not going to give a recap of it. Let's go on the censure motion. So what is a censure motion? Censure motion is an initiative by any member of parliament on a minister or a group of ministry or on the entire government. Now, why they have censured? They feel that they failed in responding to some kind of an accident or an exigency or failed in governance. When a censure motion is initiated by any member of parliament, the only difference between no confidence motion and censure motion is the government does not vote here. While in the case of the no confidence motion, the entire ruling party is subjected to vote. That is, the government needs to vote. So it tests its majority in the case of Lok Sabha, while the censure motion does not. However, censure motion is an act of pressure. It's an act of asking the responsibility responsiveness from the respective ministries and departments related to some kind of an issue, right? So these are certain devices what you see in the case of the Parliament. So let's move ahead. So the next topic is how a bill becomes an act. Now it goes into three important readings. That's the first reading, the second reading, and the third reading. So what's the first reading? It's the introduction stage. This is where the bill is introduced by any member of Parliament. What happens during its introduction is, first it so happens that, he can give an introduction to the bill, the title of the bill, take a 15 days of time period, and then it gets published in the Gazette, and then go for the second reading. The second reading is where it goes into the clause by clause discussion of the bill. All right, and after that they read clause by clause. If at all, if they have to constitute a select committee, they do it. If they have to constitute any special committees, they do it. If they have to seek a public opinion, they do it, eliciting public opinion. So all of that happens in the second reading. In the third reading, this is where the voting happens. Supposing in the voting, if they feel that there are certain provisions in the bill which needs reconsideration, they take a reconsideration of it and then go into voting, right? After all of this three, it goes to the second house. The second house has to repeat these three procedure, and then goes to the assent of the president. Once the president assents the bill becomes an act. So this is how a bill becomes an act. So the most important thing is on the difference between money bill and financial bill, and we'll also try to understand the finance bill as well. So what are the different types of bill? Ordinary bill, right? First and foremost, we should understand there are two types of bill. One is called as the public bill, the other one is called as the private bill. Public bill is where it's the government bill. That is, any minister who is initiating a bill, it becomes a public bill, which is also the government bill. While if any member of Parliament other than a minister who introduces any bill, it becomes a private member bill. Under public bill, the first one can be called as an ordinary bill. Ordinary bill is a bill which contains ordinary provision, which is not a money bill, which is not a financial bill, which is not a finance bill, which is also not a constitutional amendment bill. What is a money bill? A money bill is a bill which contains provisions related to finance, provisions related to taxation, which is given exclusively under Article 110 and which gets the certification of the Speaker. So that is called as a money bill. While financial bill is a bill in which you find that there are certain ordinary provisions, certain, not all. There are some ordinary provisions other than that of the money bill provision. Basically, money bill is also a financial bill. So you can say that all money bill can be a financial bill, but then all financial bill cannot be a money bill. So that's how it is. So you have to remember the statement, and the same statement is also given in Lakshmikant. So please do remember it. So it's some portion of it becomes a money bill. Okay. So money bill comes under the financial bill basically. So how shall we understand the differences between these two? So let's say, so it's Article 110. That's where the money bill comes into. Okay. So this is point number one, what we need to understand here. And then after that, you have financial bill. Under financial bill, you have 117, subclause 1. So I will call this as the very first one. And then the financial bill, 117, subclause 3. Okay. So this is a first difference. So anything which is covered under money bill is given under constitutional provision of Article 110. Anything which is given under the clause 1 of financial bill given under Article 117 subclause 1. Financial bill 117 subclause 3. So the second important difference is related to money bill. So it contains A to G provision which can be on expenditure, taxation, alteration of tax, abolition of tax, etc. Okay. This is money bill plus some provisions of ordinary bill. Now this is more of ordinary bill plus some financial attributes. Okay, just give me a second. Okay, so this is a second important thing. So what's a money bill there? So it comprises of anything which is related to expenditure, taxation, alteration or abolition of a tax, or any receipts which is brought from the Consolidated Fund of India or Contingency Fund of India, any receipts which goes into it, that's Consolidated Fund of India, and any receipts from that of the public accounts of the Public Accounts Fund. So all of that comes under money bill. So that's A to G provision under Article 110. Financial bill is a money bill plus some provisions of ordinary bill. It also contains some of the, especially it speaks about the finance, right? But then it also contains some provisions of the ordinary bill. Financial bill is more of ordinary bill plus certain financial attributes. Okay. So number 3, very, very important. So this is based on the certification of speaker. Compulsory. This is not required. This is not required. Not required. This is also not required. Very, very important. Next, number 4, in the case of money bill, this has to be introduced in Lok Sabha only. Introduced only in Lok Sabha. This again has to be introduced in Lok Sabha. This can be introduced in either house of the parliament. Which one? Financial bill of 117 subclause 3. So what happens after it is introduced in Lok Sabha? What about Rajya Sabha? No powers to Rajya Sabha. It gets only 14 days of time period. Rajya Sabha has only 14 days of time period. Well, in case of financial bill, Rajya Sabha has got equal powers. Rajya Sabha has equal powers. How does that come into? It has to be first introduced in Lok Sabha. After it is passed in from Lok Sabha, once it goes to Rajya Sabha gets equal powers. Relating to this, again, Rajya Sabha has equal powers. Because it is more of an ordinary bill provision. Okay. Next, number 6, recommendation of president is necessary to introduce a money bill. Recommendation of the president is necessary. While in this case, again the recommendation of the president is necessary. While very, very interesting, in the case of financial bill of subclause 3, recommendation of the president is not required for the introduction. It is required if you are doing an amendment. So basically in the second reading, recommendation of the president in second reading. Okay. Next. The most important thing here, no joint sitting in the case of money bill, while in the case of financial bill, there is a joint sitting. While in the case of financial bill of subclause 3, again there is a joint sitting. If you remember these 7 points, your money bill, financial bill clarity is done. You need not have to go to any book, refer it, nothing. You just remember these points which I have put it in the whiteboard here. That's more than enough. So what is that? That's on the articles, including what exactly do you mean by the money bill and how do they work. Okay. You can see this repeatedly and then understand how it works, right? I have told it very clearly. So money bill and financial bill differences. And also what is a financial bill and what is a money bill? Because last year there was a question on money bill and financial bill. Finance bill is different. Financial bill is different. Finance bill comes across as a part of money bill. So I'll talk about the finance bill later after this. I hope all of you have got this, I want all of you to take a snap of this, or, when you are seeing this recording, you can also, take a snap of this, or you can make a note of it, right? Please do keep this 7 points in mind whenever you are whenever you are reading about money bill and the financial bill. So money bill 110, financial bill 117 subclause 1, financial bill 117 subclause 3. That's the second part of the financial bill. So expenditure, taxation, alteration, abolition of a tax, and mind you, the parliament has the power to reduce and to abolish a tax. It does not have any power to increase a tax, because we are speaking about parliamentary control over public expenditure. So there is no question of increasing the tax by the parliament. So the parliament, if at all, if there is any statement comes into, you should always remember the statement. The statement is the parliament has the power to abolish the tax. It does not have any power to increase the tax. All right. So the second important thing, money bill provisions would be more in case of financial bill, but then it has some of the provisions of ordinary bill. So in ordinary bill, you will have a joint sitting. So therefore, since it's a money bill, first it has to be introduced in Lok Sabha. Since it has some provisions of ordinary bill, therefore Rajya Sabha gets equal powers. It has to be passed to Rajya Sabha, and Rajya Sabha gets equal powers. And talking about the president's recommendation, since it is a money bill, recommendation of the president is required. So of course joint sitting is necessary is because Rajya Sabha has equal powers. So talking about the financial bill of 117 subclause 3, say it is an ordinary bill, more of ordinary provision with some of the financial attributes financial provisions. So there is no, the introduction to that of Lok Sabha is not required. And most importantly, the speaker's provision is not required. Speaker certification is not required. So I have written required no. So it is not required. So what does it mean? The certification of the speaker is not required. And then it can be introduced in either house of the parliament, especially Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. Rajya Sabha has equal powers. So that's the point here. And then the recommendation is introduced by the president in the second reading, not in the first reading, and then joint sitting is allowed. So these are the things with respect to Article 117 subclause 3. So moving ahead, let's go to the next part of it. So let's try to discuss the finance bill here itself, so that all of you can remember this. So I'll just write the important points of the finance bill. So finance bill, it's not financial bill, finance bill. So this comes across as the part of money bill, but then it is done at the last. Part of money bill, but then it is done at the last. So introduction is to the Lok Sabha. Since it's part of the money bill, it is introduction done in case of Lok Sabha. Who does it? The finance minister. Now after this, it goes to the Rajya Sabha. Rajya Sabha can suggest amendments, and it can only suggest amendments on non-financial matters. So there are two things into consideration, because finance bill speaks about the policy of India. It might also speak about the new taxation policies in India, or any new economic policy of India. So, or the financial implication which is brought in the next 5 years or the next 2 years. So that is why we have a finance bill. Okay. So well, related to Rajya Sabha, it can only discuss on non-financial matters. It cannot suggest any amendments in the financial matters, on the money related matters. Right. After that, what it happens is, after that, this one, it goes to the parliament again. I mean, that is in the Lok Sabha. The Lok Sabha passes this. And once this is passed, it gets the assent of the President, and it's considered that both the House of the Parliament is being passing this, right? So this is related to finance bill. I hope all of you have got this, the difference between money bill, financial bill and finance bill. Okay, so that's about the money bill, financial bill and also the finance bill.